Chapter 797. Bang! 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 Hua! 4 sounds rang out in succession. The first was the sound of Jiang Hai smashing the basketball into the basket. The second was the sound of little Jordan landing on the ground. The third was the sound of him hitting the basketball rack directly. And the fourth was the sound of Jiang Hai smashing the backboard into pieces. After the 4 sounds, everyone was stunned and dumbfounded. Everyone's eyes were focused on Jiang Hai. But Jiang Hai was still hanging on the basket, chewing gum very calmly. It was as if he had just completed a very ordinary layup. He was not surprised at all. Oh my God, my God. My God, what did I just see? Another person besides Shaq to break a rebound in a game. My God, my God. Oh my God. Countless people looked at Jiang Hai. Everyone did not understand how Jiang Hai's body, which did not seem very strong, had such powerful strength. And these people's voices also shocked everyone on the court. Paul Pierce and Josh Smith ran in front of little Jordan immediately. They knew that little Jordan was only there to gain reputation. If he was injured, they would not be able to bear the consequences when they went back. But they deliberately bypassed Jiang Hai. First, it was because Jiang Hai was the local bully, and there was no conflict. Second, it was because of the kind of momentum that Jiang Hai exuded, which made them not dare to approach him. This guy was too ferocious. Little Jordan was also very confused at this time, but he did not have any intention of getting angry. First, it was because this was Jiang Hai's territory. Second, it was also because Jiang Hai's action just now was very clean. There was no additional force in the air. He directly used his own bounce speed, suspension and strength to forcefully push over, which made him completely confused. How could a yellow-skinned person have such a strong body? How could he? He could only look up at Jiang Hai. Then, with the help of Paul Pierce and Josh Smith, he stood up. The vice principal on the sidelines also sent his own cleaning staff to clean up the broken glass plates. Since the 1990s, no one had broken glass panels because the glass was made of plexiglass, which meant that it was like the front windshield of a car. After it was broken, it would become a crack, but it wouldn't fall off. It was still a hole. Jiang Hai wasn't sure what was added to the glass, but it basically wouldn't break. However, Jiang Hai had broken it today. It could only be said that this piece of glass was too fragile. Fortunately, there were still a lot of backboards in the basketball court. After the referee stopped the game, the staff went to change the backboards. Jiang Hai and the others returned to their respective resting areas and sat there to rest. Be gentle. Aren't you afraid that that thing will break and stab others? As soon as Jiang Hai sat down, Feng Yunchen, who was sitting behind him, patted Jiang Hai on the shoulder and said with a smile. Listening to her deliberately loud words, Jiang Hai also smiled. This little Anai really likes to show off. In fact, she was now more of a declaration of sovereignty, representing that Jiang Hai was her family. Look at how powerful our Jiang Hai is. Jiang Hai didn't care about this, and just smiled there. You really should pay more attention. If you really break the backboard, then you can't play anymore. At this time, Avery Bradley also came over with a smile and said to Jiang Hai. It was obvious that he was in a good mood. Evan Turner, who was next to him, also laughed. This game was really interesting. On the other hand, Josh Smith looked at the other side with some worry. After all, little Jordan was his teammate. If he was really broken by Jiang Hai, then it would be troublesome. Fortunately, Jiang Hai's actions just now were not harmful. Although little Jordan fell, this kind of fall would not cause any problems for an NBA player. Look at AI and Wade. Which one of them didn't fall 8 or 10 times in a game? They all learned how to fall without pain or injury. This was also a kind of skill. Although little Jordan's head was in a daze, he still subconsciously used this kind of skill when he fell. The fall really didn't hurt, and he didn't get injured. If you entered the NBA, I don't know if it would be a disaster or a blessing for professional basketball. But fortunately you didn't go. Looking at little Jordan and the others, who still had lingering fears, Bradley also said with a smile. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but roll his eyes. He refused to talk about the NBA, because it was impossible for him to play in this kind of thing. Now it was a good choice to occasionally abuse them. Soon the backboard was changed. Jiang Hai and the others also looked at each other and came to the court again. Jiang Hai, come on. Seeing that Jiang Hai was going to play again, the girls in the audience shouted excitedly. Look, I'm not only going to go to heaven, I'm also going to stand side by side with the sun. Hearing the shouts of the girls, Jiang Hai gave them a thumbs up and said with a smile on his face. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, everyone who knew about this joke couldn't help but laugh. At this time, the score on the court was 7-0. Although the gap didn't seem to be big, Paul Pierce and the others were clearly a little discouraged, especially little Jordan and Isaiah Thomas. They were a little afraid of Jiang Hai. After Isaiah Thomas passed half the court, he directly threw the basketball to Paul Pierce. Uncle Pi could be said to be the only person who was not affected, so let him play. Pierce was playing as a power forward today. After receiving the ball, he played solo against the NBDL player. His experience, his strength, and his weight allowed him to easily play against people who were much worse than him. After a few shots, he changed his rhythm very slowly and slipped into the lane. After all, this was an exhibition game, so Joseph didn't seriously defend and easily moved aside. After Jiang Hai looked, he also decided to play one. Just like that, Paul Pierce easily made a layup and scored the ball, scoring their team's first point. Then Jiang Hai and the others advanced, but this time, Jiang Hai didn't do it himself. It was quite boring to play all by himself. After dribbling the ball for half the court, looking at the nervous Isaiah Thomas in front of him, Jiang Hai smiled and passed the ball to Evan Turner. Evan Turner was originally chosen by the 76ers to be the core of the team. Although from a later point of view, he was a poor version of Iguodala, and was indeed not a good candidate to be the team's soul. Iguodala was a poor version of LeBron James, and he was a poor version of Iguodala. Although he was all around, it also meant that he couldn't do anything. At least he was not like Iguodala, who was the best at defense. He was not the best at anything. However, such a person was also very annoying, because when he wanted to attack, he knew everything, and it was really not easy to defend. Especially his opponent, who was an NBA player, was easily swept into the paint by him. Little Jordan was also released at this time, allowing him to complete a dunk and end the attack. When Pierce's team organized another attack, Isaiah Thomas calmed down after a round of rest. He wanted to do it himself this time, but the problem was that Jiang Hai was guarding against him, and he was indeed a little nervous. So he gave little Jordan a look in the paint, and little Jordan immediately pulled out a pick and roll. Jiang Hai did not forcibly push him away, but took advantage of the situation to let Isaiah Thomas enter the paint. Joseph had no problem defending against pick and rolls. After all, he was also known to be a man who could defend 5 positions. Although his pace was now slow, it was not particularly slow. At least he could still keep up with Isaiah Thomas's pace. However, when a guard played inside the paint, as long as he moved out of position, he could shoot. It was easy for Isaiah Thomas to move out of position, but when he saw Jiang Hai not far from him, he was a little nervous. He did not dare to shoot himself. He just happened to see little Jordan running inside the paint after the pick and roll. He could not help but think of a plan. In fact, little Jordan's actions were subconscious. When he was with the Clippers, he was mainly a threat on the offensive end. There were only 2 points. One was the offense under the basket, and the second point was the cut after the pick and roll. He did not need to attack from the low post. He did not have the ability to attack, and he did not have the player. In the Clippers, the one who controlled the rhythm was Chris Paul. The offensive knife was Blake Griffin. His main role was to defend, and the offensive side was to slam dunk. So this time after the pick and roll, he subconsciously walked inside the paint, which happened to be seen by Isaiah Thomas. Although little Thomas should be considered an offensive guard, he was still a point guard. His strength was still there. As soon as he saw little Jordan walk inside, he immediately made a high-profile move. This meant that he was going to take the free pass. Seeing the basketball flying in the air, and in a good position, little Jordan was stunned for a moment. Then he was ecstatic. He instantly ran 2 steps forward, and then jumped. He grabbed the basketball immediately, and was about to slam dunk. However, at that moment, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him. Little Jordan was stunned. The figure's right hand slammed into the middle of the basketball. Jiang Hai. Feeling the huge force in his hand, little Jordan's eyes were working well. He saw who the person in front of him was at a glance. He thought for a moment. Although he was a little hesitant, he knew that if he forced it, he would probably be overpowered. Instead of that, it was better to hold back a little to prevent himself from getting hurt. Sure enough, his idea was correct. Because just as he was about to hold back, Jiang Hai's power erupted. He did not give him a chance to resist. The basketball was sent flying. Fortunately, he had already held back. Otherwise, he would have been easily injured. Chapter 798. Bro, this is just a charity game. You don't play in the NBA. Don't be so nervous. Relax, relax. The basketball was swatted away and was caught by the high school player on Pierce's team. Then, with no one guarding the court, he scored the ball and scored 2 points. After landing, little Jordan looked at Jiang Hai with some brilliance and said with a little bit of a smile, "What a joke. Oh, I wasn't serious. Okay, I'll hold back a little." Looking at little Jordan, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment. Then, he muttered to himself and said slowly. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, many people around him felt a little nervous. "You weren't serious? What else do you want? Do you want to go to heaven?" When the game started again, Jiang Hai also started to go easy on his teammates. He only defended against his own defenders. He didn't defend too much. As for his offense, it was no longer as sharp as before, unless the 30 seconds of attack time was almost up. Otherwise, he kept getting assists. Maybe he felt that Jiang Hai didn't want the game to end so soon. So his teammates stopped passing the ball back to him. Basically, they played on their own. For a while, the game was much more interesting. Unknowingly, the time had reached 8 minutes. After Paul Pierce committed a foul, the referee called for an official timeout. The two sides were ready to switch players. At this time, the score was 35-21. Jiang Hai's team was leading by 14 points. Jiang Hai had 13 points, 7 assists, 2 blocks, 3 steals, and 5 rebounds in 8 minutes. This kind of result was really a little speechless. This was because Jiang Hai kept passing the ball. If he wanted to score, of course, if he directly killed the game, it would be meaningless. At least he didn't want to do that. When the 8 minutes were up, Jiang Hai's team had 4 people on the court. Except for Evan Tay, who continued to control the rhythm of the game. Everyone else left the game. The opposite team was the same. Only Paul Pierce, who was making free throws, was left. After that, it could be seen that the competition on the field had become more lively than before. But the viewing value had plummeted. Regardless of whether they were amateurs, university students, high school students, or NBDL players, their standards were indeed lacking. However, the situation in the stadium was rather heated. Everyone could not break through, and neither could they. In the end, they still had to rely on Evan Turner and Paul Pierce to score. After about 3 minutes, Grandpa Pai went off to rest. After all, he was old. The new player, Isaiah Thomas, might have been a little depressed by Jiang Hai's 8 minutes of playing. When he got on the court, he showed his prowess. His ability as an NBA offensive guard was on full display. Isaiah Thomas was very short. He was small and short. Because of this, when he first entered the league, no one was optimistic about him. It could be seen from his draft position. He was the 30th pick in the second round, and the last to enter the NBA. However, he did not disappoint. Although he was the last to enter, his offensive ability was gradually displayed. When he was with the Kings, he was the sharpest 6th player. After he joined the Boston Celtics, his offensive ability was infinitely magnified. At this time, he was naturally the strongest one on the court. The player opposite him was an NBDL player. Originally, in the NBDL league, his ability was very good. He averaged more than 20 points and 7 or 8 assists per game. However, at this time, he was completely destroyed by Isaiah Thomas in front of him. Not only was he unable to defend against the offense, breakthroughs, shots, and three-pointers, but Isaiah Thomas also did quite well on the defensive side. Although he was too short and could not defend against the opponent's shots, his mobile defense on the ground was quite good. Under his attack, the score was slowly pulled back. With 3 minutes left in the first half, The score was only 2 points. One goal would be enough to catch up, and even surpass. At this time, Avery Bradley called a timeout and replaced the substitutes with him and Jiang Hai. When Jiang Hai came on the court again, the audience on the sidelines reached a limit and cheered loudly. "Hey man, look, the score is back." Listening to the cheers, Isaiah Thomas, who had scored more than 10 points in a row, smiled and raised his eyebrows at Jiang Hai. "It's open now." Hearing his words, Jiang Hai then received the ball from Bradley. Then at his own three-point line, he threw it with his right hand. Yes, it was not a shot, but a throw. Just like that, the basketball hit the inside of the basket and bounced into the basket with 2 consecutive sounds of pung and schwa. Wow, it's here again. Can't we play properly? What is this? Is this a shot? Looking at Jiang Hai's ball again, the audience could not help but shout. Isaiah Thomas on the opposite side licked his lips. He was a little overwhelmed. Jiang Hai just glanced at him indifferently. For him, this was no big deal. You dare to provoke him? Your courage is commendable, but don't think about winning this game. Think about how to play well. Looking at Isaiah Thomas, who was walking back to serve the ball, DeAndre Jordan had already given up. Faced with such a humanoid monster, it was better for them to play recreational basketball. The only thing to be thankful for was that he would not play professionally. Sigh, that's the only way. With a sigh, Isaiah Thomas curled his lips and said, although he was a little unwilling, he really had no way to win against Jiang Hai in front of him. Although Isaiah Thomas admitted defeat, Jiang Hai did not know this. He thought he was going to explode. So in the next attack, Isaiah Thomas was going to pass the ball, but it was instantly snatched by Jiang Hai. Then he was like a wild dog that had escaped its leash. He rushed toward the opponent's half of the court. Then, under everyone's surprised eyes, Jiang Hai stepped about 10 centimeters outside the three-point line and flew. Yes, he flew. He flew into the inside of the three-point line. In front of the audience's jaws that were about to hit the soles of their feet, a tomahawk-style slam dunk hit the basketball into the basket. When the basketball fell to the ground, the audience was silent again. The Chinese flying man will show you what a tomahawk from the three-point line is. Where is the limit of human beings? Where is the limit of Chinese people? The invincible Chinese street ball king dominates the NBA. Let me tell you a joke. Chinese people can't make good guards. Look, I'm still quite handsome on camera. Looking at the news reported by a lot of American media and Huaxia media, Jiang Hai said to Qi Jie with a smile. When she heard Jiang Hai's words, Qi Jie could not help but roll her eyes at him. This guy was really shameless, but her eyes still looked at the collection on Jiang Hai's laptop. This was what those people had recorded when Jiang Hai had participated in the competition that day. Then, they had edited it and added the accompanying music. It really wasn't an ordinary kind of firework. Those titles just now were the titles of Jiang Hai's highlights on various major forums. In fact, when this collection was first released, she had watched it more than 10 times. When she thought that the man in the video was her man, her heart was also very happy. Coupled with the music of Remember the Name, it was really very exciting. In the video, Jiang Hai was omnipotent. He got up and made a slam dunk, suppressed DeAndre Jordan, and continuously stole Isaiah Thomas. He had infinite vision and passed the ball from behind. He stood domineeringly outside the three-point line and waved his hand to throw the ball in. Coupled with the tomahawk from the three-point line, the music and the video really ignited the whole world. As soon as the video came out, it caused a lot of sensation on the internet. On YouTube 13, there were hundreds of thousands of views overnight. However, many people who were watching the show wondered if this was a stunt, or if it was done with a computer. Immediately, many people proved that this was true. They also released a lot of original tapes, which were the original tapes of Jiang Hai's game. Looking at the original tapes, these people were even more confused. How could there be such a strong person on Earth? There were even people who linked to Paul Pierce, DeAndre Jordan, Josh Smith, Isaiah Thomas, Avery Bradley, and Evan Turner's tweets, asking if this was real or if they had filmed it. However, these people all gave a reply and said that they must be real. That's why they agreed to compete with Jiang Hai. Only Evan Turner and Avery Bradley were somewhat gloating. Josh Smith was even more generous and said that this was the easiest game he had ever played. The only pity was that Jung Hai was not an NBA player. Otherwise, he would rather spend money to be on the same team as Jung Hai. The people who were watching the show were a little confused about these people's comments. The video went viral on this side of the ocean and also spread to Huaxia on the other side of the ocean. Many people in Huaxia knew about Jung Hai overnight. Although they did not know what Jung Hai's name was and where he lived, they knew that there was someone who could be so strong among the Chinese. His strength was somewhat inexplicable. How could he make a slam dunk from the three-point line? There were even some CBA players who did not repost the video, but their point of view was that it was done by the computer, because it was impossible for people to do this. Of course, they were actually telling the truth. It was impossible for people to do this. But the problem was that Jung Hai was not an ordinary person. How could they understand the strength of Jung Hai? After watching the highlights happily, Jung Hai asked Chi Jie with a smile, "I'm now an internet celebrity." Although all he got in return was a supercilious look, Jung Hai smiled happily. Although it was troublesome for him to participate in the competition, there were still benefits for him. At least it made him very happy. In fact, the benefits he got were far more than that. "Didn't you have an appointment with Mr. Pierce and the others for dinner today? It's already 3 o'clock. At this moment, Chia came from the side and looked at Jung Hai, who was still nestled on the sofa, and could not help but ask with some doubts. Chapter 799. Sorry, I'm late. Looking at Paul Pierce, DeAndre Jordan, Josh Smith, Avery Bradley, Evan Turner, and Isaiah Thomas in front of him, Jung Hai smiled and said to them, this was a private party. After the game that day, Jung Hai had also attended the party they had organized. After the party, these people had gotten to know each other through fighting. Moreover, Jung Hai had such strength in the event that they were best at. So these people were very interested in Jung Hai. After the party that night, they had specially invited Jung Hai to get together again. However, this was a private party. After today's party, they would return to their respective teams to prepare for tomorrow's game. Among these people, Avery Bradley admired Jung Hai the most. Isaiah Thomas and DeAndre Jordan feared Jung Hai the most. There was no other way. After that game, they had really lost their confidence. They believed that if Jung Hai said that he wanted to play professionally, then he would become the benchmark of this era. Just like Jordan, it was a tragedy to be born in the same era as him. Of course, Jung Hai was much better than Jordan. However, Jung Hai did not care about the salary of the NBA. What a joke. An NBA player had to play so many games a year. They started training in mid-September, the preseason game in October, the official game in November, and all the way until mid-April last year. It was fine if they did not make it to the playoffs. They only played 82 games in the regular season and rested after that. Even if they made it to the playoffs, they still had to play in the playoffs. If they were really not careful and made it to the finals, they would have to wait until June to finish. After the end of June, there was less than 3 months of rest before the new season. Perhaps for the fans, these few months of rest would be difficult. But for Jung Hai, he would not put his energy and time into games. If he had the time, it would be better to lie at home and watch others play. It was quite interesting. They knew that Jung Hai did not care about the small amount of money from playing NBA stars. So Paul Pierce and the others were very happy to make friends with him. After all, these people were his idols. So Jung Hai was also very happy to make friends with them. That was why today's meeting was held. However, Jung Hai was not in a hurry. When he arrived, although it was still on time, the others had already arrived. It's okay. We have been practicing by ourselves these past few days, so it's not strange that we all came together. Let's go. Let's go out and play. I haven't played in Boston for a while. Seeing that Jung Hai had also come over, Paul Pierce spoke with a hoarse voice with a smile. Paul Pierce should be one of the favorite stars in the NBA. The reason why he earned his nickname was because he went to a place where he shouldn't have gone to. As a result, he was stabbed 11 times. However, he didn't die or become crippled. Instead, he became stronger and stronger. He had to admit that the human body was indeed a wonderful thing. However, although he liked to play, he wouldn't be photographed often. He still paid more attention to the time and place. Unlike the nightclubs, he was somewhat addicted to this kind of thing. Regardless of whether he was in a competition or not, he would still go to nightclubs. This was also his habit. Today was the off-season, so it did not matter whether he went to play or not. Then let's go. Although Jiang Hai did not know where they were asking him to go, looking at their green eyes, Jiang Hai knew that they were definitely not going to a good place. But to be honest, he really did not know what fun places there were in Boston. The educational atmosphere here was so strong that there were no nightclubs in the city. The atmosphere was not very good. Of course, Jiang Hai himself did not like nightclubs, because he felt that they were too noisy, but it was inevitable that it would be strange, especially since he had been to New York. However, Paul Pierce was an old local here. He knew these places very well. In fact, in the city of Boston there were indeed no nightclubs. This was also not in line with the academic atmosphere here. Therefore, the Massachusetts government and the Boston City Council would not allow such a place to exist. But people also needed to vent, especially in the United States. Those white-collar workers, students, and the like also needed to go there to play. If there was a demand, there would be a supply. Therefore, there were still such places in Massachusetts. Jiang Hai followed Paul Pierce. Not long after, they came to a block that did not seem very conspicuous, but after entering it, he found that it was a different world. In this block, almost the entire street was filled with bars and nightclubs. Now that it was dark, there were not many people. After all, Paul Pierce and the others were also public figures, so it was inevitable for them to come when there were fewer people. According to Paul Pierce, it was very safe to come here to play. First of all, 90% of the people playing here were students. Students meant that they wouldn't easily encounter badger games, wine stalls, or get into trouble. Second, there were not many students who dared to play games. They did not have to be too careful when drinking. For example, athletes usually had to be very careful when eating and drinking, because some drugs and the like were absolutely not to be touched. They were still very self-disciplined. If they were caught by the police, it would be fine. But if they failed a urine test, haha, it would be interesting. These guys' careers might be over. Jiang Hai drove and followed Paul Pierce's car slowly. Although these guys came together, each of them drove a car. This was also because if they wanted to take someone away later, they would not be able to take anyone away if they were crowded in one car. With Paul Pierce at the front, it did not take long for these people to come to the back door of a bar. After parking the car, Jiang Hai and the others also got out of the car in turn. There was a big black man waiting here for a long time. "Hey Paul, how have you been?" Seeing Paul Pierce coming over, the big man over there said with a smile, "Not bad, how about you, man?" Hearing his words, Paul Pierce also said with a smile, "I'm still the same. After all, I work for others." Shrugging, the man said helplessly. Indeed, for him, there was no difference. After Paul Pierce heard this, he smiled and took out a Franklin from his pocket and stuffed it into the man's pocket. Then the man laughed instantly. "Come on, let's go in." Then the man did not talk nonsense. He directly took out a stamp and prepared to stamp Jiang Hai's wrists. This was also an anti-underage mark in American bars. In the United States, at the age of 18, no 16, you could go to a nightclub, but the standard for drinking in the United States was 21 years old. In such bars or nightclubs in the United States, before entering, you would be asked to show your ID card, and then such a stamp would be stamped. If you were under 21 years old, you could only drink in the bar. If you were full, you could drink. Jiang Hai and the others were naturally full and dissatisfied. For the sake of Franklin, they were full. Then they went straight into the bar. Walking into the bar, Jiang Hai and the others found that there were not many people in the bar at this time. The DJ was still adjusting the equipment, and the waiters were still digging the floor and glasses. Only a few children, who looked like high school students, came in with curiosity and looked around the nightclub. Seeing people, Paul Pierce and the others all hid in the darkness, and then took the side road and went straight to a box on the second floor. The door of this box was open to the outside. They could see the dance floor outside and feel the atmosphere there. But it was not too noisy. The box was big enough. There were not only sofas, separate bar counters, and even a billiard table. This was a snooker table. Jiang Hai had seen it before, but he had never played it. He was not interested in it. Jiang Hai used to like sports. When he was young, he liked football. Later he liked basketball. For a period of time, he also liked tennis. He also played bowling and volleyball. But the only thing he didn't know how to play was two balls. One was the national ball of Huaxia, and the other was billiards. He was not very interested in it. Seeing that Jiang Hai was not very interested in it, Evan Turner and Josh Smith went to play first. Jiang Hai and the others sat on the sofa. Then Paul Pierce took the drink list and handed it to Jiang Hai. I don't really know how to drink these things. Just give me some Budweiser. Shaking his head, Jiang Hai really did not know much about these things. He liked beer. Foreign wine and red wine were not his cup of tea. All right. Give me 4 bottles of Martell Blue, a bottle of Baiweiss and a bartender. You can decide who you want. Seeing that Jiang Hai did not order, the others followed his lead. Paul Pierce also smiled. He was also a regular customer here, so he naturally knew what to order. He said casually. The waiter who led them in also smiled and left. Not long after, a woman in a woman's suit came in with a few waiters. To be honest, the woman in a woman's suit didn't look young. She was about 30 years old, but she looked pretty good. After entering the bar, she nodded indifferently to Jiang Hai. Paul Pierce waved his hand, and she walked into the bar. She was Jiang Hai's bartender today. Chapter 800. The waiters were here to deliver the drinks. After the drinks were placed, there were also some fruit platters and the like. These were all gifts for Paul Pierce. After delivering the drinks, the female bartender also inquired about their situation. After confirming their tastes, the female bartender first made a few glasses of apéritif. The so-called apéritif was similar to an appetizer. It was also called an apéritif, which often appeared in Western food. However, this wine was similar to hangover medicine. It was drunk before drinking. Firstly, it was to protect the stomach. Secondly, it was to allow the body to adapt to the alcohol in advance. This way, the body wouldn't pull the shuttle and wouldn't get hurt. Paul Pierce and the others were experts in these things. Of course, Jiang Hai would not understand these things. Soon, a few glasses of sweet and sour apéritif were made. Jiang Hai and the others also drank 2 glasses each. After drinking, they needed some time to adapt to the alcohol, so they were still playing on their own. The youngest among them, Avery Bradley, had already brought Isaiah Thomas, the second youngest of the preparation group, to the window, ready to look for prey. Josh Smith and Evan Turner were still playing at the table. DeAndre Jordan was probably afraid that 2 glasses of apéritif would not be very effective because of his size. So he sat at the bar and drank 1 glass after another. Only Jiang Hai and Paul Pierce were still calm. Jiang Hai estimated that it would be difficult for him to meet someone he liked. But Paul Pierce had met so many that he was already very calm. Sitting on the sofa, the two chatted intermittently. Before meeting Paul Pierce, Jiang Hai would think that this guy might be a very arrogant guy. Indeed, this guy was a good person in terms of style and speech. He was a very straightforward person. If he had something to say, he would say it directly. Sometimes he would joke a little too much. But after all, he was a man in his 30s. He couldn't go too far. At most, he would joke that Jiang Hai was so busy every night that his waist couldn't hold up. So when he chatted with Jiang Hai, he still had a good time. The two chatted together. Unknowingly, the sky gradually darkened. Many people began to enter one after another. On this side, Avery Bradley and Isaiah Thomas gradually became serious. Hey Paul, we'll go down first. After looking up there for about 10 minutes, they should have found their respective targets. So after saying something to Paul Pierce, they hurriedly went down. You're not going down? After seeing the two go down, the other 4 did not move. Jiang Hai asked them with some surprise. Didn't they say that black people were very urgent in this regard? Why didn't they do anything? Hey, what's the hurry? We're going down to reel in the net. Now that we're down, those girls are very calm. We have to drink with them and dance with them, and it's easy to be tricked. Let's wait a little longer. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Josh Smith said with a smile. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai could not help but secretly give him a thumbs up. It seemed that Josh Smith had received a lot of education when he was young. This was all experience. Sure enough, after another half an hour, Evan Turner, DeAndre Jordan, and Josh Smith went down together. After they went down, Paul Pierce also walked to the door of the box with Jiang Hai. Take a look and see if there's anyone you like. If there's someone you like, then go straight to the topic. If there's no one you like, then drink here. I'm going down too. Looking at Jiang Hai, Paul Pierce said with a smile. Let me take a look. If it was in the past, Jiang Hai would probably refuse. Even when he went to New York with Moses Adams, he was actually quite resistant to these things. But now he will not easily refuse. Men become bad when they have money. This sentence is actually not wrong. Hearing Paul Pierce's words, Jiang Hai also looked at the Buddha of Tiantan and did not refuse. Instead, he looked at the dance floor. Although Jiang Hai did not refuse, his vision would not be lowered because of this. If there was no one he liked on the dance floor, then he would not go down. After all, there were so many beautiful women waiting for him at home. As Jiang Hai glanced around, not long after, he saw a beautiful figure on the first floor. This figure did not look like a student. She was not on the dance floor, but sitting on the bar next to the dance floor. After Jiang Hai glanced at it, he smiled, then pointed at the figure. Wow! I advise you not to get involved with that woman. Seeing Jiang Hai pointing to the woman, Paul Pierce could not help but shake his head, and then looked at Jiang Hai with some pity. His eyes clearly said, You are a nightclub newbie. Is there a problem? Looking at Paul Pierce, Jiang Hai asked with some doubts. That kind of woman is so eye-catching in the nightclub, but she doesn't have any men around her. This is not a novel. It's impossible for such a woman not to be targeted here. But now, friend, this means that there must be a bodyguard around her. Such a woman, we call her trouble. She's not a rich girl who will force you to marry her. She's the boss's woman, so you understand. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Paul Pierce also said with a smile. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also curled his lips. It seemed that he had no interest in anything else. Then he shrugged. After watching Paul Pierce go downstairs, Jiang Hai sat at the bar and prepared to drink some wine by himself. Seeing that Jiang Hai did not go downstairs, the female bartender also stood up. Her job was to make drinks for Jiang Hai. Now that Jiang Hai did not go downstairs, it was naturally time for her to work. Sir, what would you like to drink? Looking at Jiang Hai, the female bartender asked indifferently. Oh, I don't know much about these things. Just make whatever you want, but don't make it too strong. I have to drive back in a while. You know, my home is in Winthrop. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai smiled and said very plainly, Okay. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the female bartender also picked up a lot of bottles and glasses, as well as raw materials and the like, and began to mix. This was the first time that Jiang Hai watched someone mix a drink. To be exact, it was the first time that he watched someone mix a drink at such a close distance. So he also watched very carefully. But the movements of mixing a drink were limited. Unconsciously, Jiang Hai had watched it once and had no interest. As for men unconsciously, his eyes glanced at the unbuttoned shirt of the female bartender. He didn't know if it was because it was hot here. After all, mixing a drink also required a lot of movements, or because she was used to it. The top 3 buttons of her shirt were unbuttoned. Jiang Hai hadn't noticed it before. But at this moment, not only could he see her collarbone, 2 indescribable things that were constantly moving due to the tremors, there was also that purplish-red vest. In addition, he also saw a tattoo on the inside of this woman's vest. Whether it was in ancient times or modern times, whether it was in Huaxia or the United States, tattoos were very common now. In Huaxia, there were different kinds of things that were tattooed. But in the United States, tattoos were actually more of a pretense or a commemorative thing. It might not necessarily have any special meaning. Originally, Jiang Hai didn't pay too much attention to this tattoo. But suddenly, a flash of inspiration flashed in his mind, and he suddenly remembered the badge that he had been tracking down. It seems a bit like it. Seeing this constantly looming tattoo, Jiang Hai's eyes widened, and he subconsciously looked at the female bartender in front of him. Feeling Jiang Hai's gaze, the female bartender also smiled. Although her main job here was to mix drinks, if she could do something with the guests in these rooms, then she wouldn't refuse. Of course, the most important thing was that her purpose was different from the girls below. Those girls, as long as they were pleasing to the eye, then something indescribable would happen. And she had a purpose. Originally, after she came in and found Paul Pierce, she knew that today might just be a bartender. But she didn't expect that Jiang Hai would stay, and it seemed that he was very interested in her. Sir, flaming hot lips. At this time, the wine in her hand was mixed and placed in front of Jiang Hai, and she said with a smile, "May I ask, where are you from?" Jiang Hai asked her after taking the wine glass she handed over. "Me? I'm from California." "Sir, you look like you should be Asian." Huaxia. "Japan? Korea?" Looking at Jiang Hai, this person asked with a smile, and at the same time, she mixed the next glass of wine and kept shaking her private part. "Well, I'm Chinese. You don't have to mix this cup anymore. Can you go somewhere with me?" Looking at the female bartender in front of him, Jiang Hai looked at her and asked. He was quite nervous about the pattern in his heart now. It was related to his golden finger. "Oh, gentlemen, in our line of work, if we go to other places to mix drinks, the price will be different." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the female bartender here couldn't help laughing, and her eyes were curved. At least her goal now is money. Chapter 801. Money. Hearing the female bartender's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. If there was one thing he didn't lack, it would be money. Looking at the female bartender in front of him, Jiang Hai took out his wallet, then took out $1,000 from it, and put it on the table. $1,000 was definitely not a small amount of money in the United States. One had to know that a salaried worker in the United States would only earn about $20,000 a year, less than $30,000 a year. If one could earn $50,000 a year, that would be about $500 a week. This female bartender's annual income was about $40,000, less than $600 a week. $1,000 was equivalent to a week and a half's salary. How could she not be tempted? Seeing Jiang Hai being so considerate, she didn't say anything. She just put down the wine glass in her hand and walked out of the counter, looking at Jiang Hai with a pair of charming eyes. "Then where are we going to barbecue? Are we going to your house, the hotel, or there? If we're going to barbecue, we'll have to hurry." The female bartender walked straight to Jiang Hai's side, then pointed to the bathroom in the distance, and said to Jiang Hai, "Then let's go there. But I think it will take a long time." Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai also smiled. He mainly wanted to ask about the tattoo. Of course, there were some other things that he was also very interested in. "Let's go." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the female bartender smiled and pulled Jiang Hai into the bathroom. In this private room, there were 4 separate bathrooms. Not only were there toilets, wash basins, and makeup stations, but there was also a lot of space. There was no need to say what it was used for. After entering the bathroom, the female bartender directly took off her woman's suit, then looked at Jiang Hai with a charming face, unbuttoning her shirt one by one. Seeing this, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be a little impatient. He directly pulled her over, then pulled her shirt off with force, and then directly unbuttoned her vest. In an instant, 2 indescribable things jumped in front of Jiang Hai, playing with them with both hands. Jiang Hai also carefully looked at the tattoo on it. Sure enough, it was the same as the one he saw in the book. But the problem was this thing was not a popular tattoo. Why did she get it on this place? Jiang Hai was a little puzzled. "Do you like it here so much? Let me help you." Seeing that Jiang Hai liked a certain part of her body so much, the female bartender giggled, and then took the initiative to squat down. After all, it was summer now, so Jiang Hai wore very little pants. There were only 2 pairs of underwear, one for the inside, and the other for the outside. They were pulled down by her. The female bartender's eyes suddenly lit up. She sniffed it gently, then looked at it, then opened her mouth and swallowed it. Jiang Hai's hands were still holding 2 places, constantly checking them. After a while, The female bartender took the opportunity to release Jiang Hai's unspeakable parts. Jiang Hai's hands were still holding two places, constantly checking them. After a while, the female bartender took the opportunity to release Jiang Hai's unspeakable parts. It was sandwiched between the two indescribable places, using the saliva just now to constantly move. You seem to like it here very much? After freeing her mouth, the female bartender looked at Jiang Hai and asked with a smile. Well, indeed, but what I'm most curious about is the tattoo here. Where did you get this thing? Looking at the tattoo in front of him, Jiang Hai said calmly, but deep in his heart, he was very nervous. After all, this thing is very important. If you can calm me down, then maybe I will remember it. Looking at Jiang Hai, the female bartender chuckled and said faintly. Jiang Hai nodded his head and said, Don't worry about it. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai didn't say much nonsense. He directly picked her up and stood up himself. Standing on the ground, he put her on something indescribable. With a loud scream, the rhythm began, and the war began. During this period, Paul Pierce and the others also came up to drink, but after seeing that Jiang Hai and the bartender had disappeared and a bathroom was locked, they understood that Avery Bradley and Evan Turner went directly to the public bathroom downstairs. The remaining three were also occupied by Little Jordan, Isaiah Thomas, and Josh Smith. Paul Pierce was more shameless and directly started to do it in the room. About half an hour later, the men beat the gong and went home with their satisfied female companions. The door of Jiang Hai's bathroom was also opened. Looking at the text message from Paul Pierce on his phone, Jiang Hai didn't care. Now he was more concerned about the woman's tattoo. Do you remember it now? Holding the woman who was drunk like mud, Jiang Hai walked to the side of the sofa and then sat down with her in his arms. His hands were still constantly checking the tattoo. Wow, you're so awesome. Now I know the origin of this tattoo. This thing was left to me by my master. When I was 16, I met a master in California. He opened a bar. When I went to play with my classmates, I met him. Then he taught me how to mix drinks. Of course, when I was 18, I drank too much one night. When I got up, I found myself lying in his arms, and I had this thing tattooed on my breasts. This is not a good memory. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the female bartender was very satisfied. She made money and enjoyed it. Although it was a little embarrassing, how much was self-esteem worth to her? Really? Who is he? Did he say what this thing represents? Looking at the female bartender in front of him, Jiang Hai asked eagerly. His name is Bruce David. I heard that he retired from the Navy before. This thing, he just said that when he went to Antarctica to perform a mission, he saw something similar to a totem. I don't know what it is. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the female bartender shook her head. That's all she knows. After hearing her words, Jiang Hai also carefully wrote it down. You've helped me a lot. These are all for you. Have a good rest. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but nod. Her information is indeed very useful. Jiang Hai only needs to find this guy now. Compared to finding a needle in a haystack before, it's not so difficult for Azalina and the others to find him now. Jiang Hai's sixth sense tells him that this guy named Bruce David must have something to do with what he wants to know. Then he took out the rest of the money from his body, picked a few $100 gauze, and put it on the table. Then he left. But this time, he wasn't in a hurry to return to Winthrop, because Azaria and the others were more focused on protecting him and his manor. When the time came, they would have to look for him on the outside. After leaving the club, Jiang Hai drove directly to downtown Boston. He is now a drunk driver, but he won't be caught by the police. It's a bit difficult to make him drunk. Soon, the car arrived outside the villa rented by Al-Sarah and the others. As soon as Jiang Hai's car arrived, the garage of the villa opened. Al-Sarah, wearing a black apron on the upper body and a pair of leather shorts on the lower body, was at the door at this time, looking at Jiang Hai. As Jiang Hai's car stopped, she smiled and pounced on him. Without saying a word, the two first kissed. After a long kiss, Al-Sarah couldn't help but look at Jiang Hai with a smile. Well, there's a taste of alcohol and a hint of woman in your mouth. Tell me, where have you been? Looking at Jiang Hai, Al-Sarah looked at Jiang Hai and said. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai just patted her butt. And she quickly ran upstairs like a frightened rabbit, and Jiang Hai followed her upstairs. As soon as he walked up, Jiang Hai found that everyone was here today. Raylis Carter, Biriak Trotsky, Valentina Alalikia, and Al Sarah were all here. "Boss, you're here." As soon as she saw Jiang Hai coming, Raylis Carter jumped up at once, then smiled and asked Jiang Hai to sit in her seat. She then sat directly in Jiang Hai's arms, grabbed Jiang Hai's hands, and put them on her two indescribable places. This made Jiang Hai a little confused. What's going on? Just now on TV, it said that if a man keeps helping like this, he will grow up. Hearing Jiang Hai's doubts, Biriak couldn't help but smile and say. But hearing this, Jiang Hai couldn't help but roll his eyes at them. They only watch those nonsense shows. He only knows that if a woman is pregnant, the baby will grow up. And it's not very good if it's all big. At least Jiang Hai is not used to it. All his women are the same as Wallace Shelley. Sometimes some differences are more interesting. Okay, I will stay here tonight, so you don't have to worry. I came here to ask, is there any progress on the task I gave you? Although he said so, Jiang Hai didn't put Lei Lizzie down, but asked directly. Okay, I will stay here tonight, so you don't have to worry. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the four people here looked at each other. This is the first time that Jiang Hai asked them about the progress of the task book. But to be honest, although they have checked a lot these days, the progress of the task is not very satisfactory to them. There is some progress in some direction, but it is not to the level that can be confirmed. Looking at Jiang Hai in front of her, Valentina spoke first, and the other three here also became serious. Chapter 802. You gave us a total of 2 missions. The first mission is about news of Ezoatis. I'm really sorry about this news. We can only confirm that he's still alive, because the satellite once photographed him, and a group of people going to New Jersey. However, we couldn't find out his exact location, what he did, or the identity of those people. We can only confirm that those people should be some soldiers or mercenaries. Seeing Jiang Hai ask Valentina, who was in charge of a mission here, couldn't help but say to him, speaking of which, this is also her dereliction of duty. If she had been more serious at the beginning, maybe that person wouldn't have escaped. Oh, I understand this. What about the second mission? Hearing her words, Jiang Hai nodded. In fact, Jiang Hai is quite satisfied with what Valentina did. She found the location of the other party one step ahead of the police, and then almost forced the other party into a desperate situation. She only missed a small fish, which made Jiang Hai's evaluation of her actually quite high. After all, she only has herself, unlike before, where there are many tarantulas, poisonous spiders, web spiders, and her team to serve her. Jiang Hai is still clear about the difference between a person and a team, so he is still quite satisfied. The second mission is about the badge. I have also followed up on that, and I roughly know the situation. That badge was leaked from an Antarctic exploration mission launched by the United States. That Antarctic exploration mission was said to be to explore the Antarctic continent, but in fact, I heard that it was to find the former Third Reich of Germany, but they didn't find anything. The person who leaked it was also dealt with, but because that person used to work in the military, he didn't die, but he lost his military position. There are rumors that he went back to his hometown, but the location of his hometown is only recorded in California. I don't know what he did specifically. After watching Valentina in front of him tell him the news, Aller Sarah also told him the news about himself. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also nodded. She can know so much with just a badge. Indeed, Galina Sarah is also very outstanding, but now he knows more detailed information by accident. The first thing is to continue to follow up. The second thing, you can narrow down the scope. You can check a person named Bruce David in Los Angeles or San Francisco. He should be running, or used to run a bar. You can check if he is the person I'm looking for. Looking at Al Sarah in front of him, Jiang Hai said seriously. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Sarah nodded seriously. She didn't deny what Jiang Hai told her, but she was ready to go and take a look. Of course, if it wasn't true, she would have quietly told Jiang Hai, but she wouldn't question Jiang Hai in front of others. So these women were actually very smart. Okay, girls, the business is over. We should also have some fun together. After watching Sarah write down what he said, he directly picked up Lizzie in front of him. In her exclamation, his big mouth instantly touched her lips. Feeling the strong breath of Jiang Hai, Lizzie was stunned at first, then she really counterattacked. She was one of the strongest people in the world, so she really enjoyed fighting with Jiang Hai for half a day. Seeing that Lizzie's battle had begun, the other girls couldn't help but laugh, and then directly rushed into Jiang Hai's arms. The night was silent. Of course, if it had to be described, it would only be a few adjectives, such as gunfire and so on. Any more detailed description would be sealed, so in order not to be sealed, they could only be described in a single stroke. Early the next morning, Jiang Hai woke up from a pile of fragrant legs and jade-like arms. Looking at the time, it was almost 8 o'clock. Jiang Hai was ready to return to Winthrop. After kissing the heads of these girls one by one, Jiang Hai jumped out of bed. In fact, he knew that these girls had already woken up, but everyone had their own habits. These girls didn't like the feeling of leaving, and they didn't like the feeling of leaving. In the past, when they went back to accompany Jiang Hai, they would quietly get up in the morning and leave. Jiang Hai wouldn't say anything when he woke up. Now that Jiang Hai had left, although he knew that they were already awake, Jiang Hai wouldn't say anything. He also didn't like the feeling of leaving. Looking at the new set of toiletries in the bathroom, Jiang Hai also smiled. After opening it, he washed his face, brushed his teeth, and then carefully placed his cup next to the 4 cups, indicating that he also had a place here. After that, Jiang Hai went downstairs, walked to the lawn, and prepared to go to the garage to pick up the car. Who are you? Just as Jiang Hai was about to walk to the garage, 2 high school students who looked very similar suddenly looked at Jiang Hai with vigilance and surprise. Looking at their appearance, Jiang Hai was also a little confused. He didn't seem to know them, so why did they look at him as if he was a ghost? He didn't understand. Oh, what's the matter? Do we know each other? Looking at these people in front of him, Jiang Hai asked with some doubts. You just walked out of Sarah's sister's house? Who are you? Why did you come out from there? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, these 2 high school students were clearly a little nervous, but they still mustered up the courage to speak loudly. Sarah? Well, if you think about it, I should be her boyfriend. Looking at these 2 people, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. In fact, he was also young once, so he naturally knew what these 2 guys meant now. Looking at their clothes and the direction they came from, they should also live nearby. From the fact that he knew Sarah's name, he should know Sarah. Looking at his nervous, excited and longing eyes, he should have a crush on Sarah. Indeed, women like Sarah, no, to be exact, women like Sarah, Valentina, Beliak, and Laylis are actually quite attractive to those high school students. They are young, not much older than them, but they are very mature, good-looking, and have perfect figures. In addition, they need to disguise themselves, so they are usually kind to others. Such women, in the eyes of those inexperienced high school students, are perfect goddesses. It was just like some girl groups. Although they only needed to sing, dance, and become idols, it was possible that just a small action would make those high school students who were their fans go crazy. Although Valentina and the others are not idols, they are obviously perfect goddesses in the eyes of these people. In fact, similar to what Jiang Hai thought, these 2 boys are a pair of brothers who live nearby. They are 1 year apart in age. One is a sophomore, and the other is a freshman. In high school, the one who met Sarah first, because the 2 brothers were on the same level, and were often bullied by some bad boys in the neighborhood. Of course, this is a rich area, and bad boys do not mean that they are gangsters. At most, they are some delinquents who snatch pocket money and so on. But once they were met by Sarah. That day was the day Jiang Hai went to the company. Because she saw Jiang Hai, Sarah was in a good mood. She did a good deed every day. So she taught those delinquents a lesson, and saved the 2 brothers. And the one who came back with her was Valentina. The 2 brothers also met Sarah and Valentina Trotsky. And from then on, their first love appeared. Every morning, they would rather be late for school and wait here for Valentina and Sarah, just to say, "Hi, good morning." But today they waited for Jiang Hai. However, if Jiang Hai wanted to say that it was his first love, especially his secret love, it would be severely shattered by reality. When he was in high school, he also had a secret love for his school's campus bell. But one Friday, he saw his school's campus bell being touched by a man who could be her uncle, and got into a BMW. That day, he knew that his first love was a story, and stories were all lies. So now he said it directly. Damn it, how is it possible? How could Sister Sarah like someone like you? After hearing Jiang Hai's words, the high school student instantly collapsed and shouted loudly, "Oh, why is it impossible? Because I'm rich. This world is the world of the rich. Let me tell you, not only is Sarah my woman, but the other girls in this villa are also my women. I was with them yesterday." Hearing her crazy words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but pick his nose with his hand. After digging out a lump of booger, he gently flicked it away, and then said impatiently. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, the other high school student also seemed to be struck by lightning. "Rich? What's the use of having money? You guy, do you think you can override human nature just because you have some stinky money?" These two cowards didn't dare to directly come up and fight with Jiang Hai. They only dared to shout about chicken soup and the like. I don't know if I'm above human nature, but at least I'm lying on top of them. Listening to his words, Jiang Hai said with a disdainful look, then opened the garage door and taught the little brats a lesson. He was still in a good mood, so he deliberately got on his shield, honked twice, and left with a disdainful look. Looking at the back of Jiang Hai's car, the eyes of these two people were full of anger and despair. Glancing at the villa beside them, they were really heartbroken. Their goddess actually, their life, their belief collapsed just like that. Chapter 803. Boss, don't do that. Someone else will see. Huali Shelley said shyly as she sat in Jiang Hai's arms. But she didn't make any other movements. She didn't even try to push him away. Instead, her body continued to move forward. She wanted Jiang Hai to be in a more convenient and comfortable position, playing with her two indescribable things. What's there to be afraid of? If someone else sees, I'll take her down too. Besides, who haven't you seen before? Listening to Wallace Shelley's words, Jiang Hai looked at her with a smile, then said very indifferently, but his hands did not stop at all. Really? I didn't think after leaving the organization, I'd be out of the tiger's den and into the wolf's den. How did I end up with such a strong boss like you? Huali Shelley heard Jiang Hai's words. She couldn't help but smile and roll her eyes at him, but she didn't resist. Instead, she pulled her clothes up a bit more. It had to be said that Huali Shelley was a wonderful person, a wonderful woman. She knew how to please Jiang Hai. Compared to other people, she put more energy into enjoying life and fulfilling the tasks Jiang Hai gave her. She also tried to please Jiang Hai, but still had a bottom line. But she put more effort into pleasing Jiang Hai. As long as Jiang Hai wanted, Jiang Hai didn't even need to say anything. She'd take the initiative to come over and let Jiang Hai do whatever he wanted, and she'd never get tired of it. Just like today, she just walked over and saw Jiang Hai staring at her. She took the initiative to throw herself into his arms. So long as Jiang Hai wanted, she could do anything. Of all the girls, she was the first one to be completely dominated by Jiang Hai. Complete domination included front, back, and top. It didn't matter the occasion or the place. As long as Jiang Hai wanted, she could help him solve it. In addition to helping Jiang Hai in this regard, sometimes at night when a few people were together, the girls were usually attracted to Jiang Hai, but also to Jiang Hai. They almost interacted with each other, unlike Prawalton. In fact, they liked each other more. Jiang Hai was actually an accessory, but he had to admit that at the beginning of the war, sometimes vision was still very important. Especially when two girls were together, it stimulated Jiang Hai's feelings. But in the past, the girls around him couldn't let go. But after Huali Shelley joined, she took the initiative to help Jiang Hai create a visual conflict, which made Jiang Hai feel very comfortable. Naturally, he liked Huali Shelley more and more. At the same time, one needed to be strong to forge iron. Huali Shelley was also quite good at this. She was very beautiful. Among Jiang Hai's bodyguards, She should be the most beautiful except for Azalina and Galina. Of course, if you take into account the bonus points of her figure, she might be the most beautiful. Her figure was completely out of human common sense. Since she followed Jiang Hai, some parts of her that couldn't be described seemed to be getting bigger and bigger. At the same time, they were quite firm and quite soft. But there was no effect of gravity, and although she wasn't pregnant, there was always a milk fragrance. Jiang Hai usually liked to play with these two things. It felt very good, just like now he was doing it. And although Huali Shelley said so, in fact, she said so because she knew that Jiang Hai liked to hear her say so. She was really a very good person for Jiang Hai. But a while ago, because of the summer, it was too hot, so the two restrained a little. But Winthrop was similar to the weather in the north of Huaxia. After the beginning of autumn, it would quickly become cold. Although it wouldn't snow in a few days, at least the temperature was dropping at a speed visible to the naked eye. Just like now, it was already mid-September. The temperature in Winthrop was basically 21 or 22 degrees during the day. It was already possible to wear long-sleeved sweaters. The temperature at night was about 16 degrees, so there was no need to turn on the air conditioner to sleep. Sometimes they even had to close the window to sleep. Otherwise, it would be a little cold. So when the two were together, they didn't feel hot. Of course, the scene was easy to make people feel hot. But at this time, the door of Jiang Hai's villa suddenly opened, and then they saw Qi Jia and Qi Ya coming in from outside. At a glance, they saw the situation in the house and couldn't help but roll their eyes at Jiang Hai and Huali Shelley. One of Huali Shelley's best ways was not only to please Jiang Hai, but also to please everyone in the villa. If Jiang Hai was the owner of this villa, then the most popular one was Aphrodite in the past. But now it was Huali Shelley, because almost every woman here had been taken care of by her, and their relationship with her was quite good. After all, they had done something together. At first, they were a little embarrassed, but now they were a little used to it, and she and Jiang Hai's actions were also a little strange. Okay, if you want to play, go upstairs and play. Marian and Daliana will be back soon. Walking to Jiang Hai's side, Qi Jia patted Jiang Hai's shoulder and said to him. Hearing Qi Jia's words, Jiang Hai also chuckled. As for Huali Shelley, she also stood up and pulled down her clothes directly. As mentioned before, these girls were wearing quite cool clothes in Jiang Hai's villa. Except for Daliana, Marian, and the newcomer Taraga, the other women's clothes were mainly simple. Basically, they wouldn't wear a vest. In summer, they would just wear a short-sleeved shirt, which allowed them to see everything they wanted to see. If it was the hottest time, they would only wear a gauze jacket. They basically didn't wear pants, only a pair of underwear. Therefore, the employees who knew what the women in Jiang Hai's villa wore would call Jiang Hai in advance and tell Jiang Hai that they were coming. Otherwise, they wouldn't come easily. But basically, they wouldn't come to Jiang Hai because Jiang Hai wasn't the kind of person who immersed himself in the land of women. Every morning, he would walk around his manor, going to the stable, the cowshed, the dock, and the wine manor. So if there was anything, he would say it in the morning. Cough, the vegetable garden is almost done. Seeing Wallace Shelley stand up, Jiang Hai also coughed and sat up straight to block something that was out of control. At the same time, he looked at Qi Jia and Qi Ya and said, it was now autumn. Although Jiang Hai had built a greenhouse, many of the ripe vegetables were ready to be stored in the warehouse. The rice was almost fully grown. These days, Qi Jia and the others were busy with these things. Of course, they were all very light work. They weren't busy or tired. Otherwise, Jiang Hai would have gone to help. For example, when they were harvesting rice, he had already contacted a nearby manor that planted wheat and rice, and borrowed their machinery to harvest rice. In the United States, most Americans ate oats in the morning, and they usually ate bread, so they planted wheat. They grow very little rice. Very little. How many Americans have you seen eating rice? But the United States was a multi-ethnic country, and there were many Asians in Boston. Asians such as Huaxia, Japanese and Korean all ate rice. So some people here also planted rice, but it was very little. Americans were more willing to import rice from Asia to sell, because it could be sold at a high price, and it was more convenient. When Jiang Hai was planting rice, He had to look for a lot of people in Winthrop before he was able to find a transplanter. Now that he wanted to harvest the rice, it was naturally very troublesome. He believed that after these new rice were harvested, the taste of his rice would be very good. Well, there wasn't much to harvest in the vegetable garden. Originally, Sister Feng wanted pickled cabbage, but after calling her mother to ask the steps of pickling cabbage, she gave up. Hee. All right, what do you think this is? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi Xie said with a smile. The thin and weak girl who came to Jiang Hai for treatment had unknowingly grown up, and her illness had also been cured. But her pure white hair, and her body temperature, that was lower than Jiang Hai's all year round, made her the person that Jiang Hai liked to hug the most to sleep. Looking at this cute girl, Jiang Hai also smiled, then lowered his head, and looked at the thing that she handed over. When he saw it, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment, because Jiang Hai did recognize this thing. Where did this come from? Pointing at the small thing in front of him, Jiang Hai asked with some doubts. You'll have to ask little Huang about this. He found me. I saw him holding this thing in his mouth, so I snatched it away. I didn't expect it to be this thing. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi said very seriously. To be honest, as a chef, the things that made her happiest were Jiang Hai and finding good ingredients. Yes, this thing was an excellent ingredient. It could be said that it was one of the top ingredients in Western cuisine in the world, but it was rarely used in Chinese cuisine. Qi was a Chinese chef, so although she knew that this was an excellent ingredient, she was not too excited. This was because there were very few things that she could cook. On the contrary, Jiang Hai was a little surprised, because in his view, this thing was not as simple as an ingredient. This thing also represented money, because this thing was called Song Lu. Chapter 804. To be honest, in the beginning, Jiang Hai wasn't interested in truffles. It was understandable. His taste was very huaxia, so he didn't like to eat Western food. People's preferences were like this. If he didn't like to eat it, he would subconsciously ignore it. Moreover, if he wanted to plant truffles, he needed to have high conditions. He needed cows and fish, so Jiang Hai didn't think about truffles. Later, after tasting it at Du Feimin's place, Jiang Hai became very interested. Of course, the so-called interest wasn't because he felt that it was delicious, but because it was so expensive. He wanted to take a look at it. After he came back, he went to get some truffle seeds. Of course, truffles were similar to mushrooms. They weren't counted as seeds. Speaking of which, they weren't considered as mycelium. If you want to plant truffles, you have to use sterile saplings to artificially infect them. Then, you have to bury the trees in a suitable place for them to grow, and carry out meticulous maintenance and management. Generally speaking, it would take 4 to 5 years for truffles to grow. Then the production would slowly increase. It could take up to 40 to 50 years to produce truffles. However, Jiang Hai didn't know about this. Therefore, after he got these saplings, he planted them in his forest. This was the kind of person he was. He was passionate for 3 minutes, but after a few visits, he became a little lazy. Then, he divided the saplings into a few days. After injecting some spiritual energy into each of the saplings, he no longer cared about them. Unknowingly, it seemed like a period of time had passed. However, he didn't expect this thing to grow. After taking the truffles from Qi, Jiang Hai carefully looked at them. He was very sure that these things were indeed edible. Moreover, they weren't particularly small. They were about 2 fingers thick. They were very good-looking white truffles. It weighed about 12 grams. Don't underestimate this 12 grams of white truffle. The price of this truffle had always been high, because artificial cultivation had only started in recent years. According to Jiang Hai's understanding, these things were calculated according to special grade, first grade, second grade, and so on. According to the diameter, the price was also different. The difference between them was quite big. For example, black truffles, if sold in China, the cheapest one was 400 yuan per kilogram. Of course, this was also extremely expensive. The most expensive one was 1,200 yuan, and 2,000 yuan per kilogram was very common. But one had to know that Jiang Hai's white truffle was not cheap when he bought it. Now that he wanted to sell it, it naturally would not be cheap. The most expensive white truffle was from Italy, but Jiang Hai believed that it wouldn't be cheap here. Based on the price in 2013, it was $3,500 per kilogram. Of course, the price dropped a little in 2014, but it still wouldn't be less than $2,000 per kilogram. If it was special grade, then the price would be even more terrifying. Jiang Hai's beef was advertised and promoted. 1 kilogram was about $500, which was already unbelievably expensive. One had to know that without advertising and promotion, Jiang Hai's beef was only about $400 per kilogram. This truffle was several times more expensive than his beef. He originally thought that his cultivation had failed. After all, he didn't care about it. Even if there was a harvest, it would have to wait a few years. But now, it seemed that these things were quite lively. He had to admit that Jiang Hai was a man of his word. If there was no spiritual energy, he would be a very ordinary loser. He had to admit that sometimes a cheat was really important. I'll go look for it. Looking at the weather outside, Jiang Hai saw that it was quite good. The autumn air was refreshing, so Jiang Hai took the truffle and went out of the room. As soon as he came out, he saw Xiao Huang and Xiao Bai playing with each other in the grass. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel a little amused. It seemed that Xiao Bai's strength was slowly approaching Goldie's. One had to know that when they first arrived, Goldie completely suppressed Xiao Bai's existence. The two dogs couldn't play together. Xiao Bai had to play with Dai Teeth and Qiu Qiu, but now it didn't care about Dai Teeth. Qiu Qiu also settled on the roof all year round. However, Dai Feng was quite happy because he had a lot of people to bully. For example, the 2 guinea pigs and the white-haired Greenland seal. He still had people to accompany him as he enjoyed being the boss. Seeing that they were playing together, Jiang Hai whistled. After the two dogs heard Jiang Hai's whistle, they immediately ran over and squatted in front of Jiang Hai. They opened their mouths and looked at Jiang Hai. "You found this truffle, right? Take me to the place where you found it, and see if there are any more." After patting the two dogs' heads, Jiang Hai said to Goldie. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Goldie, who was originally very smart, naturally understood his words. Goldie then ran towards the forest in the distance. Seeing his movements, Jiang Hai stood up and ran towards the forest in the distance. Not long after, they arrived at the periphery of the forest. As soon as they entered the forest, Jiang Hai felt that the temperature in the forest was much colder than outside. Originally, the forest looked very sunny from the outside. But for some unknown reason, as soon as he entered the forest, he felt that the inside of the forest was somewhat cold. It was as if a cold wind was blowing. This made Jiang Hai somewhat puzzled. One must know that in his manner, other places were very sunny. In the past, when they came here to play, it was also very sunny. How long has it been since they came here? Why does it feel like this place is haunted? But soon, before Jiang Hai could think about these things, Goldie had already brought him to the place where he found the white truffle. It can be seen that this forest was much younger than the forest next to it. But although it was much younger, the trees were growing quite well. The ground here was very fertile, and most importantly, Jiang Hai's spiritual energy was very strong. These trees, in less than a year, had already grown to about 3 meters tall. They were about the same as a 3-year-old tree, but if you cut down these trees, you will find that they were really new trees. Jiang Hai naturally wouldn't cut down these trees. According to Goldie's guidance, Jiang Hai also came to this forest. Goldie sniffed the ground, then his 2 front legs began to dig quickly. Before long, 2 pieces of soil were dug out of the ground. Goldie, who had been waiting for a long time, immediately held the 2 pieces of soil in his mouth and went in front of Jiang Hai. After Jiang Hai took the soil, he saw that it was indeed a white truffle. Moreover, it was similar to the one in his hand. It was about 2 fingers wide and 2 fingers long. It was very ugly gray and somewhat yellow. Jiang Hai wasn't naive to think that white truffles were white. It was only compared to black truffles. Jiang Hai looked at the 2 truffles in front of him and couldn't help but smile. Sure enough, there was such a thing here. Where else is it? But this time, you don't have to dig it out, just tell me. Patting Goldie's head, Jiang Hai smiled and said to him, Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Goldie also quickly searched the forest. It didn't take long for him to determine that this forest wasn't big. There were more than 20 trees, less than 30 trees. There were about a dozen places with truffles. Of course, these things were still very little. After all, it was only the first year. Generally speaking, after planting, it would take 4 years for truffles to grow. But now truffles have already grown in the first year. If it grows too much, then it would be a bit scary. Jiang Hai's aura can be used to its fullest extent. Originally, it was the limit of this organism, but it can't change the genes of this organism. For example, if he wants to turn a cat into a tiger, this is impossible. But he could turn a North American mountain lion into a North American lion. Just as Jiang Hai was thinking about this, suddenly a fishy smell rushed into his nose. This made Jiang Hai look back in an instant, but this look also startled Jiang Hai. At this time, in Jiang Hai's line of sight, a giant python was coiled not far behind him, spitting its tongue at him. But the reason why he was only startled is that Jiang Hai had already recognized the identity of this giant python. Judging from the fact that Goldie and Xiao Bai didn't issue a warning, this giant python should be one of his former pets, the water monster that he saved in the past. It's just that he hasn't seen it for almost a year, and this guy is getting bigger and bigger. This aura is a bit scary. Looking at this giant beast, Jiang Hai couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva, because this guy was indeed a little strangely long. When Jiang Hai first saw it, it was only 3 or 4 meters long. The thickest part was about the same size as an ordinary man's calf. It wasn't very big. Jiang Hai knew that after absorbing the aura, this guy would very likely become longer and stronger like the mountain lion. However, he didn't expect it to become so terrifying. At this time, this guy had already grown into a giant beast. The thickest part was almost as thick as Jiang Hai's waist. Jiang Hai was more than 1.9 meters tall, and his muscles were very dense, so he weighed more than 200 kilograms. His waist was 3 feet, which was about 1 meter. This guy was already so thick before eating. As for how long it was, Jiang Hai didn't know, but it definitely wouldn't be short. Seeing that Jiang Hai was looking at it, the giant python spat out its tongue even more happily and then slowly swam over. Jiang Hai knew that it had no malice towards him, but seeing this guy swim over like this, Jiang Hai's scalp tingled a little. Chapter 805. Hello, it's been a long time. Looking at the giant snake in front of him, Jiang Hai smiled and patted its head. Looking at Jiang Hai's hand, the snake hesitated at first. After all, this was a snake, a wild animal, not a domestic pet, so it was reasonable for it to hesitate. However, it still couldn't refuse Jiang Hai's hand. It wanted to dodge, but it still let Jiang Hai's hand touch it. Cold-blooded animals are not like hot-blooded animals. They enjoy this kind of caress very much. Just like Little Yellow, Xiao Bai, and even Dai Fong, they all like to let Jiang Hai scratch them. However, cold-blooded animals feel that this is very strange, but it still endured it. Perhaps feeling that it didn't like this, Jiang Hai only touched it twice and gave up. Take me to see that big guy. After retracting his hand, Jiang Hai's main purpose of coming here was achieved. That was to come and see the growth of the truffles. Knowing that the truffles were still growing, Jiang Hai was relieved. Anyway, there was nothing to do now. Let's go and see the other 2 tyrants in this forest. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, the giant python couldn't help but stick out its tongue, then turned its head and slowly swam into the forest. Jiang Hai also walked into the forest with it. At this time, Jiang Hai walked behind the giant python and realized that this giant python was really big. The largest snake in the world was the water python. Its largest body length was 5 to 8 meters, and the record for the largest living snake was 6 meters. But at this time, this water serpent has already broken the record of a living creature. According to Jiang Hai's visual estimation, this water serpent is at least 7 meters long. Although it has not reached its maximum size, it is obvious that this guy can still grow a lot. With the movement of the spiritual energy and the rich ingredients in this forest, it was bound to grow again. Jiang Hai was now looking forward to it. If he saw this guy again next year, how big would it be? Would it be like Dasha and exceed 10 meters? If it really broke 10 meters, it wouldn't be a water gloom anymore. This will remind Jiang Hai of the legendary world's largest snake, the extinct Titan python. It is known as the most terrifying cold-blooded animal after the dinosaurs. But since his lion can become a North American lion, why can't his water serpent become a Titan python? Now that he thought about it, he was a little excited. Hiss! Just as Jiang Hai was thinking while walking, the water gloom in front of him couldn't help but stop as it heard a hissing sound. Hearing this sound, Jiang Hai also reacted and looked at the open space in front of him. It was still the same place, the pond in the forest and the forest next to it. With the hissing sound of the water python, some splashes appeared in the pond over there. In the distant forest, there was also the sound of a zoo rubbing against the grass. Almost at the same time, two huge figures emerged from these two places. The one in the pond was naturally the huge crocodile, but at this time, it was naturally much bigger than last year, just like the water gloom. At a glance, Jiang Hai felt that it was very different. The hard armor behind it, the snake-like eyes, and the sharp teeth in its mouth all made people shudder. Moreover, its body seemed to be even bigger than the water gloom. It seemed that its breakthrough was just around the corner. In the forest on the other side, a figure emerged at this time. It was none other than Jiang Hai, one of the first wild animals he came into contact with, the mountain lion. However, when Jiang Hai first came into contact with this mountain lion was still an expectant mother. Not long after, it had been promoted to a mother. When he saw it last year, it and its children were still living quite happily. But today, it seemed that only it was left. Lions, tigers, and other animals were all like this. They would raise their cubs until they reached a certain age, basically around 2 years old. Then they would drive these cubs away, mainly because these guys had grown up and needed their own living space. And these felines also had their own territory. This was also deeply engraved in their DNA. Therefore, although Jiang Hai's forest was extremely rich in resources, as a mother, she still drove her children away. Jiang Hai had nothing to say about this, but this guy's body was a little bigger than last year. When this North American mountain lion saw Jiang Hai, it was also very excited and rushed over at once. Then its huge head kept squeezing Jiang Hai's chest, and Jiang Hai also scratched its fur with his hands. This guy liked Jiang Hai scratching its fur very much, not as disgusted as cold-blooded animals. I really didn't expect you to be getting bigger and bigger. While scratching this big guy, Jiang Hai said with a smile. To be honest, Jiang Hai can see that these guys are doing well, and he is also quite pleased. After seeing that it was Jiang Hai, the big crocodile shook its head, but it wasn't asking for attention. Instead, it turned around and dived into the water. After waiting for a while, it resurfaced with something in its mouth, and threw it in front of Jiang Hai. Hearing the noise, Jiang Hai also looked at the thing thrown by this guy. But after taking a closer look, Jiang Hai was a little surprised, because this thing looks like a bunch of rags, and it's obviously a few days old. He squatted down and looked at it. These rags exuded a stench, then picked up a small wooden stick. Jiang Hai picked up the rags and found some parts inside. These parts are very familiar to Jiang Hai. Guns. Looking at these things, Jiang Hai looked at the three animals in front of him with some doubts. Maybe it saw Jiang Hai's gaze. The mountain lion cried proudly. Looking at its appearance, Jiang Hai couldn't help but imagine. People who bring guns into this forest are obviously not good people. The people in Jiang Hai's manor know all the animals here, so naturally, they won't be injured. These bad guys entered this forest, but obviously, they were dealt with by these three guys. Well done. If anyone dares to sneak in, eat them for me. But you have to pay attention to your own safety. After imagining the course of events, Jiang Hai nodded to the three animals in front of him. This can be regarded as affirmation of their merits. Then he touched their heads one by one, and transmitted his aura to them. This can also be regarded as a reward for praising them. Feeling the baptism of aura, these three animals were very happy. Jiang Hai wanted to see what kind of terrifying creatures they would become under his care. No one would complain about having too many trump cards, right? After playing with these animals in the forest for a while, Jiang Hai returned to his villa, and gave the new truffle he dug up to Chia. Looking at the truffle that Jiang Hai dug up, Chia was also very surprised. When did we plant truffles in our manor? Looking at the white truffle in her hand, she originally thought that getting one would be good enough. She didn't expect that after Jiang Hai went out for a walk, he actually got a few more. According to her estimation, the white truffles in her hand alone will be sold for thousands of dollars. It is really because this thing is too expensive. Hey, you don't have to worry about this. If this thing is gone in the future, you can tell me that our forest produces this thing. Hearing Chiya's words, Jiang Hai also said with a smile. He didn't tell Chiya the truth, because Chiya knows these things. The truffle that was planted in the past can't bear such a big truffle without 4 years. It doesn't matter if others don't know. But if it is spread out, he may have more trouble. In fact, if Jiang Hai wasn't really short of money, now it seems that it is better to hide the beef and fish of the past. Sometimes it is more in line with his interests to sell secretly, but now that it is announced, then let it be announced. But he still has to put more energy on the beef and fish. As for other things, he still has to hide them. Okay. Chia is a very traditional Huaxia woman. She will not ask the root of the matter. Now that she got Jiang Hai's answer, she also smiled and walked into the kitchen with the truffle. She wants to study the truffle cake that will be made tonight. Jiang Hai continued to go back to his reclining chair. His life has been like this recently. No matter what others do, he is living a very good life. Monotonous life is his favorite. But in the evening, Robbins Garcia gave Jiang Hai a call. Today, Prawalton took away a batch of cattle from the manor. At present, there are about 10,000 cattle left, including 4,000 cows, 3,000 calves, and 3,000 bulls. In other words, it is time for Jiang Hai to buy cattle again. And this time, Robbins Garcia and Jiang Hai have a good discussion about what cattle to buy and how many cattle to buy. Because Jiang Hai's pasture is not the same as before. His land area has expanded by nearly 150%. And this pasture is not a problem to raise 100,000 cattle. But he knows that Jiang Hai is not prepared to raise so many cattle, because he wants to use the new land to sell grass. But Jiang Hai has to decide on the specifics. As for Jiang Hai, he didn't know what to raise for the new cattle. He knew that the Angus cattle must be raised. After all, almost everything in his manor was made according to the Angus cattle, including the cowshed, food, and so on. But now the problem in front of him was, should he just raise the Angus cattle? Or should he mix in some other cattle? Or should he open a second place to raise cattle? Were those grasslands really all for selling grass? He needs to consider this. Chapter 806. Miss Prawalton, today's beef distribution has ended. This is the detailed report. Holding the report in her hand, Isabel Rowland pushed open the door of Prawalton's room and said to the person inside. But halfway through, she couldn't help but see the situation inside. Then she couldn't help but blush and immediately closed the door. "Isa, you came just in time. Come over and help me." Looking at Isabel, who came in, Prawalton, who was lying on the bed, couldn't help but say to her loudly. Hearing Prawalton's words, Isabel Rowland couldn't help but blush, but she didn't say anything. She quickly came to Prawalton's bed, then lay on it, her head sticking to one of Prawalton's indescribable places, and Prawalton also narrowed his eyes in fascination. About 10 minutes later, Prawalton groaned, and a lot of water stains appeared on Isabel's face. Standing up, Isabel took a few pieces of paper from the bedside table, wiped it carefully, and then looked at Prawalton with some complaints, and Prawalton couldn't help but smile awkwardly. But she didn't care about this. After pulling Isabel, Prawalton's lips were also on her lips. After a long time, their lips parted, and Prawalton also lay on the bed lazily, showing endless nobility in his gestures. "Sigh, I solved it myself and you solved it. It is indeed far worse than the real guy. The sense of fulfillment and security that Jiang Hai gives me is something that you can't give me." With a sigh, Prawalton said helplessly, "Since you want it, you can go to him. Anyway, this place is not far from his manor." Looking at Prawalton, Isabel wiped her face and said slowly, "Oh, you think I don't want to go? There are so many things here. How can I go just because I want to? Prawalton rolled her eyes at Isabel Roland and said unwillingly. Upon hearing her words, Isabel Roland smiled. No one knew better than her how busy Prawalton had been recently. Now Prawalton's position in the Walmart Group had once again risen to a higher level. It was for no other reason than Jiang Hai's fish. Jiang Hai's fish was the same as his beef. The quality of his fish was there to sell at a high price. And by selling at a high price, not only did Jiang Hai benefit, but the Walmart Group, or to be exact, Sam's Club also benefited. After that banquet, Jiang Hai made it clear that he was only doing business with Prawalton. However, Sam's Finger Club was making money, and so was the Walmart Group. For ordinary people, whether a group was profitable or not depended on its shares, but for shareholders, income was the most important thing. Last year, Jiang Hai's beef made Sam's Club earn an extra $300 million. After dividing the $300 million, each person earned tens of millions. And this year, with more fish and more beef, they will earn even more. A conservative estimate is that Sam's Club will earn about $800 million from selling Jiang Hai's beef and fish. This is equivalent to those major shareholders earning tens of millions a year. Prawalton almost instantly became a fragrance in the eyes of these people. Americans are so realistic. If you can create wealth for others, then you are their god. If you can't, then you are a stinky bee *tch. Everything has to be based on benefits. This is the law of society. This is completely different from Huaxia. For example, some famous NBA stars, such as Allen Iverson and Marbury, who did not come from good families. After they became famous, they gave the money they earned to their former brothers to spend. For them to pay bail, it is very likely that they will spend all their wealth. This is a very particular thing in the eyes of Huaxia people. This kind of man is suitable to be friends with, and their brothers will also give him feedback. It's just that outsiders can't see it. In Huaxia, many people will talk about these things and feel that their personality is more charming. But in the United States, this is a teaching material for the opposite. They believe in elite education. Elites should play with other elites. People like Allen Iverson should hang out with those rich and powerful people. They should not hang out with those bastards from the neighborhood. Even if they used to take care of you. Even if they grew up with you. Trash is trash. This is destroying yourself. It is hard to say which of these two ideas is better, and which is worse. But you have to follow the rules of the country you are in. Now that they are in the United States, Prawalton and Jiang Hai, who can create wealth for them, are the people they want to curry favor with. But as the saying goes, the bird that sticks out will be shot. Their current position is very important, so there are many people watching them. There are some national institutions, of course. They are not looking for Jiang Hai's secret recipe. In the United States, this is a good thing. They are quite concerned about human rights. If you have something good, you must give it to the country. You can keep it for yourself. If you can't keep it, then it is another matter. If you can keep it, then no one will care about it. The ones who are watching Prawalton are the tax authorities. This is the real big deal. Secondly, there are the factions in those companies. It can be said that if it were not for Jiang Hai, Prawalton may have been pulled down. After all, this position is a position of real power, and it is a position of rich real power. It can be foreseen that Prawalton has been very careful now. She is also very busy, so busy that she has no time to see Jiang Hai. That guy is really too much. I am creating wealth for him, but he doesn't even come to see me. Hearing Isabel Roland's words, Prawalton can't help but complain. Then she touched the two places that can't be described. Is my charm not high? This guy doesn't even come to see me. Heh. You also know how slow that guy Jiang Hai is. If you don't tell him, he won't come over. However, I have a chance for you to be alone with him. Looking at Prawalton in front of her, Isabel Roland said with a smile. Hearing her words, Prawalton's eyes lit up in an instant. Tell me what opportunity? Hearing her words, Prawalton said with shining eyes. To be honest, she really wants to see Jiang Hai now. Not only does her heart need Jiang Hai, but her body also needs him. According to the beef report sent today, there are about 3,000 beef cattle that can be sold in Jiang Hai's manor. This is the amount of beef cattle to support the winter. That is to say, Jiang Hai is going to buy beef cattle again soon. As his biggest customer, you can naturally accompany him to see the beef cattle, right? Hearing Prawalton's words, Isabel Roland couldn't help laughing. Hearing her words, Prawalton's eyes lit up at once. This is a good excuse. Okay, then I'll talk to the board tomorrow. But before that, I have to call Jiang Hai and tell him not to rush to buy. Hearing Isabel Roland's words, Prawalton also said seriously. At the same time, thinking of Jiang Hai, her tongue couldn't help but lick her lips, feeling some parts of her contracted. She seems to like Jiang Hai more and more. At this time, Jiang Hai, Robbins Garcia, Burke Dollar, and Philman Turner were drinking in the courtyard in front of his villa. This afternoon, Robbins Garcia called Jiang Hai and asked him if he was free in the evening. They should discuss what kind of cattle to buy. Jiang Hai thought for a moment, and told him to call Burke Dollar and Philman Turner over after buying the cattle in the evening, to discuss the introduction of cattle. Because there were new cowboys this time and a large enough pasture, Jiang Hai didn't plan to open a new pasture. But he could raise more cattle. This time, in addition to the cows and calves, he planned to buy 35,000 more cattle, making a total of 40,000. Among them, Angus cattle were the main breed. After all, other than this type of cattle, other cattle were not so easy to buy in large quantities. Jiang Hai was going to buy 25,000 Angus cattle. As for the other 10,000 cattle, Jiang Hai was going to try more cattle breeds. Because he had a lot of people now, and he planned to wait for a while. He planned to get some cattle dogs. These dogs were very useful when guarding large herds of cattle. But just as they were discussing there, Jiang Hai's phone rang. After picking up the phone, Jiang Hai deliberately turned to another place to talk. Robbins Garcia and the others wouldn't ask about it. That was the boss's secret, and they didn't want to do it anymore. So the three of them were still there, discussing what kind of cattle to buy and how many to buy. If there were workers in Jiang Hai's manor who were the most confident, it must be these cowboys. But just as they were talking there, Jiang Hai came back from a distance with a smile on his face. Boss, what's the good news? Looking at Jiang Hai, Philemon Turner asked him with a smile. It's a good thing. Pulla Walton is coming. Don't look at me like that. This time, he's here for official business. We can relax on the issue of cattle breeding, because he's here to solve the problem of cattle breeding. Looking at the three people in front of him, when they heard that Prawalton was coming, they pretended not to know anything. Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. Then he told them the purpose of Prawalton's visit. Of course, some things were just incidental. Chapter 807. Hey, you're finally here. Let's go back to the hotel to rest first? Then we'll come back tomorrow? Looking at Jiang Hai's group driving over, Prawalton in the distance also greeted them with a smile. Beside her, there were several people Jiang Hai was familiar with, such as Fail Ferrio, Colin Bavlovich, Barbara Martina and Cheryl Lee. Except for Isabel Loren, who still had to take care of the company, everyone else had already arrived. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also understood the meaning in their eyes, so he said with a smile, Okay, let's see tomorrow. Naturally, since Jiang Hai said so, his men would not disagree with Jiang Hai at this time. After laughing, they felt a little tired, so they took the group to the best hotel near the bull market. Prawalton had already booked the rooms at this time, 1 suite and 2 standard rooms. The standard rooms were prepared for Robbins Garcia and Burke Dollar, who came with Jiang Hai. As for the suite, as soon as they walked into the suite, Prawalton had already turned around and kissed Jiang Hai. She tiptoed lightly, and her lips were pressed on Jiang Hai's lips. Her tongue invaded instantly, challenging the friction and the flames of war. Do you know how long I've been waiting? You bastard! You didn't come to Atlantic City to see me. Their lips parted for a long time. Prawalton's eyes were about to burst into flames. She looked anxiously at Jiang Hai and said loudly. At the same time, her hands were also taking off Jiang Hai's clothes. Feeling her wildness, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile bitterly. It seemed that a fierce battle was inevitable today, but fortunately, he was already prepared. In such a battle, he was really not afraid of anyone. Since Prawalton wanted to fight, then he would fight. He was so tough. Soon, the clothes on the two disappeared without them noticing. When Jiang Hai was about to counterattack, Prawalton suddenly frowned, then patted Jiang Hai's chest. "What's the smell on you?" Looking at Jiang Hai, Prawalton complained. She can accept Jiang Hai, but in essence she still likes women, so if it was just Jiang Hai's smell, she could tolerate it and even enjoy it. But at this time, the smell on Jiang Hai's body was really strong, so she couldn't help but frown. "I'm full of sweat and tobacco smell. I'll go wash up first, wait a minute." Hearing Prawalton's words, Jiang Hai also smelled. He came here in a car with Robbins Garcia and Burke Dollar. They didn't come here to pull cattle, but to choose cattle, so they only drove an F-750. Cowboys were heavy smokers, so naturally, they smoked a lot in the car. And it was impossible to close the windows to smoke, so the windows had to be open. So Jiang Hai's body smelled a lot of smoke and sweat. Now that Prawalton said so, Jiang Hai was also ready to wash up. "Go!" She patted Jiang Hai and pointed to the bathroom. Then Jiang Hai walked in with a smile, turned on the shower, and let the warm water flow on his body. Jiang Hai also let out a long breath. Jiang Hai liked to take baths, at least he thought so. If the weather was good, he would take a bath twice a day. When the weather was cold, even if it was winter, he would take a bath. But now, he didn't have time to take a bath. After quickly washing his hair and applying body soap, he left the bathroom. When he walked into the room, his eyes almost popped out. Because at this time, Prawalton was already in a mess with her girls. Fail was licking her indescribable place. Colin and Barbara were attacking her two indescribable places. And Cheryl was kissing her passionately. Their hands were also on each other's body, and they kept coughing. When Jiang Hai saw this, the fire that was extinguished because of the shower instantly reignited. Seeing this, he didn't hold back and directly walked into the room, pulled Cheryl up, and kissed her on the lips. Prawalton didn't mind. She looked at one of Jiang Hai's indescribable places and kissed it. This was a toy she wanted for a long time. After a long time, the three separated. Jiang Hai went to the bed and drove Fail away, and directly carried Prawalton. The battle began. Half an hour later, Prawalton was defeated. Jiang Hai and Cheryl fought again. Then Colin, Fail, Barbara, and Jiang Hai naturally wouldn't let them go. After a round of fighting, Prawalton recovered and the battle resumed. When the sounds in the room were completely extinguished, it was already late at night. Jiang Hai stayed in Prawalton's body and hugged her to sleep. Prawalton was very satisfied at this time, the corner of her mouth slightly raised, indicating that she really liked this feeling. Unknowingly, the sky gradually turned bright. Jiang Hai was woken up, and the way to wake him up was to say good morning. Fail, Cheryl, Colin, and Barbara didn't care about the mixed smell of Jiang Hai and Prawalton at all. In fact, for them, these two smells were very familiar, and they liked it very much. However, Prawalton didn't like this mixed smell, so she just lay beside Jiang Hai and looked at Jiang Hai. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai naturally wouldn't allow himself to be captured without putting up a fight. Sometimes this was how war started. But fortunately, everyone knew that they still had things to do today, so they didn't go too crazy. At around 10 o'clock in the morning, Jiang Hai and the others had already packed up and changed into new clothes. They opened the door and went downstairs to the buffet restaurant to have a meal. After that, they met up with Robbins Garcia and Burke Dollar, who had already gone to the bull market. "My people have analyzed the energy of your pasture. Your pasture is really good stuff. If you only let Angus cows absorb it, they won't be able to absorb it completely. After all, this kind of cow is huge. So you can try to buy some bigger cows. They'll eat about the same amount of pasture, but they'll produce more meat." After everyone met up, Prawalton seemed to have forgotten what happened last night, and this morning, she returned to her cold and elegant state. Today, she wore a black gauze blouse and a pair of black gauze trousers. The trousers were very loose. Her body was draped in a woman's suit that was specially made for draping, not for wearing. Her face was painted with light makeup. Her hands were crossed in front of her, as she spoke to Jiang Hai with a cold and elegant face. She wasn't Jiang Hai's woman now. She represented the Walmart group. When she said that she wanted to watch Jiang Hai buy cows, she naturally prepared her own materials and analysis. Prawalton wasn't the kind of person who would just sit around and do nothing. I know, but no matter what, we have to prioritize stability. So this year, I'm going to buy 20,000 Angus cows and 15,000 other cows. Even if there's an accident, I'll still have beef to sell. Hearing Prawalton's words, Jiang Hai smiled and said seriously. This was also the result of his discussion with Robbins Garcia. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton didn't say anything. She also thought that it was safer to do this. A true master wasn't about who had the guts or who had the spirit to gamble, but who had the smallest loophole and who could persist for the longest time. Sometimes some people said that stagnating was not retreating, but for Jiang Hai, stagnating was actually the greatest progress. Because he was already earning a lot, he didn't need to work hard to make money. He only needed to wait patiently. Sometimes being too ambitious wasn't a good thing. At least, Jiang Hai didn't like to take risks. Boss Birkin, I just took a look. The beef cows here are indeed much better than those in Massachusetts. Let's go in and take a look. Hearing that Prawalton didn't object to Jiang Hai's words, Robbins Garcia couldn't help but smile and say, Jiang Hai could insist on discussing countermeasures with them. This was also an affirmation to them. He was indeed very happy. After hearing his words, Jiang Hai and the others also officially entered the bull market in front of them. As soon as they walked in, Jiang Hai couldn't help but exclaim, because this bull market was really big. After ordering to buy beef cows, Jiang Hai and the others originally wanted to go to the bull market in Massachusetts to take a look. It was only the middle of September now. It was just right to go there to see the cows. The time to buy cows was divided into two periods, March and September. March was called the spring calves. Basically, they were buying calves. Cows were pregnant for 9 months. When the weather began to warm up in March and April, it was also the time for cows to breed. Spring was also the time for all things to do. A cow's gestation period was 270 days, which was 9 months. Mating took place in April, and the calf would be born in January or February of the following year. If the calf did not die prematurely, it would be the time to sell the calf. September was the time to buy the big calves. September, October, and November were the 3 months when the big calves would eat fiercely. In December, they would start to fatten up. Before March of the following year, this batch of cows could be sold. Jiang Hai wasn't the kind of person to buy calves, because it was troublesome. Calves were like naughty children. They weren't that obedient. Moreover, calves were stubborn and strong. It was really difficult to control them. Although the costs had decreased, Jiang Hai never bought calves. He couldn't do anything about the calves that were born, but he wouldn't buy them. He originally thought that all bull markets in the world were similar, but now he knew that he was really naive. Chapter 808. Yes, Jiang Hai and the others were not in Massachusetts. They were in New Hampshire. Speaking of this state, it was estimated that 99 out of 100 Chinese people did not know about this state. Indeed, there was nothing much to introduce about this state. It was a very small state with an underdeveloped economy and a small population. There were also no historical events and so on. The main honor of this state was the New England region. The so-called New England region referred to the northeast corner of the United States. It was originally a British colony and also the birthplace of the United States. However, the center of that region was Boston. This New Hampshire was really a state with no sense of existence. In 2011, the state's GDP was only $63.5 billion, ranking 42nd among the 50 states in the United States. This was indeed a very poor state. The state's biggest source of income was the export of printers, photocopiers, and the like. In the local economy, the most important part was its animal husbandry. To be exact, it was dairy husbandry, because it was also one of the largest dairy farms in the United States. There were 5 types of cattle. People who had some understanding of cattle knew that the chromosomes of these cattle were different. Ordinary cattle, yaks, bison, buffalo, and yellow cattle. After domestication, cattle were also divided into 4 types: dairy breeds, meat breeds, part-time breeds, and labor breeds. Among them, The most famous labor breeds were Huaxia's buffalo and yellow cattle. Why was Huaxia able to become the world's most powerful country before the development of machine civilization? First, it was because of the number of people and intelligence. Second, it was because of the cattle. Compared to European cattle, Huaxia cattle were more resistant to rough feeding and more durable. They worked more and ate worse. Naturally, the crops they grew were guaranteed. In that era, cattle were important tools not for eating. European cattle were more suitable for eating than working. It was precisely because of this that Huaxia was so strong. But later it was all machines that were doing the work. Cattle that were used for labor had almost no place to be used. Cattle that could work were now useless and worthless. This was one of the reasons why cattle that were used for labor were eliminated. The bull market in New Hampshire was the biggest bull market in New England. In the past, Jiang Hai had only heard of it, but he had never been here before. Now that he had walked in, he really felt like his horizons had been broadened. In the past, when he didn't know anything about cows, he felt that all cows were about the same. They were just divided into big cows, small cows, bulls cows, and so on. But now, as soon as he walked in, he found that it was really an eye-opener. In fact, he hadn't gone to the bull markets in Texas and Montana yet. After going there, he knew what it meant to have a lot of variety. The New Hampshire cattle market was divided into 3 areas: the dairy area, the beef area, and the mixed-use area. Jiang Hai walked into the dairy area first. At present, dairy cows were more popular than beef cows in the world, because the consumption of milk was greater. You don't have to eat beef cows, but you have to eat milk no matter which country you are from. You have to take the civilian route, so naturally, you don't have to worry about the sales. Just like Huaxia, Huaxia had a lot of dairy cows, but the milk produced was not enough for China's consumption. There were many dairy factories in China, and everyone knew how much milk was in their dairy products. But milk was calcium supplements, and it was under the control of the country. The price couldn't be raised. Moreover, most of the dairy cows in China were raised by small families. Compared to the big countries in Europe and the United States, it was a lot worse. There was a time when people in China were disgusted with France. It was probably because the French said that they would rather throw away their excess milk than give it to Huaxia people who were in a milk crisis. Also, because of the 2008 Olympics, they boycotted France. But to be honest, in Europe, there were almost no countries that liked Huaxia. After all, they were all Westerners, and they all wore the same pants. Among the countries that hated Huaxia the most, many people who liked World War II history recommended Germany. That's right, Germany was the country that hated Huaxia the most besides the United States and Japan. Spain, which had countless fans in La Liga, was also a country that hated Huaxia the most. Next was the United Kingdom and Poland. They were all countries that were not worse than France. In the dairy area, there were mainly 4 types of dairy cows. Among them, Jiang Hai only recognized the Holstein, which was the Dutch dairy cow. In addition, there were 3 types of dairy cows from the United Kingdom. They were called Irish cows, graceful cows, and British cows. When these dairy cows gathered together, the air was filled with the smell of milk, other than the smell of cow. The smell of milk mixed with the smell of cow dung made people feel, well, it was a little disgusting. Jiang Hai's cows were mostly used for meat, so he didn't need any dairy cows to produce milk. The milk produced by his cows was enough for the people in their manor, so they quickly left the area. After the dairy area, it was the beef area. At this point, Jiang Hai knew what it meant to be surprised by nothing. There were dozens of types of cattle here. Jiang Hai recognized some of them, and Jiang Hai didn't. Robbins Garcia introduced them one by one to Jiang Hai. Hayford cattle, Shorthorn cattle, Angus cattle, Charolais cattle, Limousin cattle, Piedmont cattle, Johnina cattle, Lincoln red cattle, Hornless red cattle, Gros cattle, Devon cattle, Mary Gray cattle. In addition to these ancient breeds, there were many breeds of cattle that were crossbred with another type of cattle, Zebu cattle and ordinary cattle. For example, Brahman cattle, Boraford cattle, Barogas cattle, St. Gertrudis cattle, Beef King cattle, Panamera cattle, Bifaro cattle, and so on. The The so-called zebu cattle was a type of cattle that specialized in the tropics. Zebu cattle were found in Africa, the tropics of Asia, and some places in South America. This type of cattle had a huge tumor on the back of their neck, which looked very strange. Jiang Hai was very interested in a type of cattle called beef king cattle. This type of cattle was very popular here. Many people would buy this type of cattle, because this type of cattle should be considered a recently cultivated breed of cattle. It had the advantage of being able to tolerate coarse feeding, rarely getting sick, and growing fast. At present, there were many large cattle farms in Texas and Montana that specialized in supermarkets, raising this type of cattle. This type of cattle was born from birth to 15 months. Except for the 3-month calf period, this type of cattle could grow 1 ton a year. Moreover, the slaughter rate was quite high. In supermarkets, more than 50% of the commercial-grade beef was from this type of cattle. However, this type of cattle had a fatal flaw, which was that it couldn't grow good meat. Therefore, Jiang Hai just looked at it and gave up. In the last section, they sold varieties that could be used for both purposes. They could be eaten as beef cattle or raised as dairy cows. The main breeds were the dual-purpose shorthorn cattle, Simmental cattle, Swiss brown cattle, Danish red cattle, Angler cattle, Sindhi red cattle, Sahiwa cattle, and so on. However, these had nothing to do with Jiang Hai, and he wasn't going to buy the dual-purpose type. He was mainly eyeing the beef cattle. There were a lot of beef cattle to choose from here. After Jiang Hai came here, he directly chose 20,000 Angus cattle. After booking the place, the cattle business here would naturally send the cattle to him on time. Unless they didn't want to make money. Looking at Robbins Garcia and the others, they knew that these people wouldn't dare to fool Jiang Hai with bad cattle. After choosing the 20,000 Angus cattle, Jiang Hai was ready to look at the other cattle. In fact, Jiang Hai was quite interested in the Siani cattle. However, as soon as Jiang Hai asked about this cattle, he gave up. This cattle was the largest breed of beef cattle and could grow to 1780 kilograms. But first, this cattle was a service breed. In the beginning, it was like the Belgian blue cattle. It was good-looking, but it couldn't produce marbled meat. This was the most important thing. So after Jiang Hai thought about it, he gave up the other cattle. Instead, he chose a more stable one. He first bought 5,000 shorthorn cattle. This kind of cattle had a creamy fat ratio of 3.9%, which was a little low, but the slaughter rate was very high, 65 to 72%, which was much higher than the average beef cattle. An adult cattle could grow to a ton. In addition to the shorthorn cattle, Jiang Hai also bought some other cattle, such as Charolais cattle and Limousin cattle. He also bought 5,000 of these two types of cattle, a total of 35,000, plus the 10,000 in the manor. He had a total of 45,000 cattle. Of course, 3,000 of these bulls would be killed this winter. There were also some calves that would grow up and then be killed. Although it was a bit cruel, this was the reality, wasn't it? You bought cattle really fast. You bought it just by looking at it. Looking at Jiang Hai quickly writing a check in front of her, Prawalton couldn't help but ask with some doubts. After all, she was in this line of work, so she had never bought cattle, but she still understood it. According to the experts on her side, buying cattle also needed to look carefully. However, Jiang Hai was not the same as her. Jiang Hai didn't need to look particularly carefully when buying cattle, because he was very confident in his aura and his ranch. He only looked at the sample cattle. After confirming that there were no major problems, he ordered the cattle. The inspection after the cattle was delivered to his door was naturally much stricter. At least, the cattle with defects could not pass the eyes of the cowboys, so he was quite happy to buy the cattle. Really, I thought you were going to buy cattle for a long time, so I specially asked for a week's leave. Looking at Jiang Hai buying the cattle happily, Prawalton snorted. It's only been 2 days. I can't go back to work now, right? Besides, I haven't had enough fun yet. Looking at her, how could Jiang Hai not understand what she meant? He smiled, hugged her waist, and kissed her on the mouth. Doesn't that mean that you can accompany me when you are not at home for 5 days? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton couldn't help but smile. This guy is really getting better at talking. But at this time, Jiang Hai and Pra Walton's phones rang almost at the same time. The two had to separate and answer the phone respectively. However, although the people who answered the phone and the people who called were different, the first sentence was the same. Du Feimin's beef cattle are ready to be sold. Chapter 809. Your Highness, the cows have been slaughtered. As Jiang Hai and the others received the news, in a magnificent villa in Dubai, a palace? A man in black asked Du Feimin, who was standing in front of him. The cows have finally been slaughtered. Du Feimin let out a long sigh. His hand, which was originally holding the wine glass, couldn't help but tremble. Then he took a deep breath. It had to be known that he had used up all of his blood and sweat over the past year to raise these cows. This success or failure was related to his position in this country. Although it was impossible for him to become the chief, he still wanted more power. What's the situation like? Du Feimin took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. After taking a sip of red wine, he asked the man in black in front of him. The man in black could naturally tell that, although his master was pretending to be calm, he was actually very nervous. Thus, he didn't beat around the bush and directly said, a total of 100,000 cows were slaughtered this time. All of them were selected to be relatively healthy. The average slaughter rate was 68%. The percentage of marbled beef was 100%. The average percentage of premium grade beef was 5.8%. When he heard the man in black, Du Feimin couldn't help but let out a long sigh. Then, the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up. It wasn't because he was inexperienced, but because they had actually succeeded. They had actually succeeded. Du Feimin didn't raise Angus cows. He only raised big cows, each of which weighed about a ton. Based on a ton, the average slaughter rate was 68%. That was 680 kilograms of beef. 5.8% of that was 40 kilograms of beef. Based on the price of $700 per kilogram, the premium grade beef was worth $28,000. Buying the cow cost about $2,000. Including the labor, that was only $4,000. Of course, this didn't include the cost of the fodder. Just the premium grade beef alone was enough to make 7 rounds, not to mention the other types of beef. After receiving the report from the man in black, the smile on Du Feimin's face became even brighter. Butchering rate, 68%. Special grade meat yield rate, 5.8%. Special grade meat yield rate, 11.2%. Preferred grade meat yield rate, 21.3%. Standard grade meat yield rate, 27.1%. Commercial grade meat yield rate, 17.9%. Usable grade meat yield rate, 13%. Minced grade meat yield rate, 8%. Canned grade meat yield rate, 2%. Injury rate, 0.13%. According to the current wholesale price in Europe, premium grade beef was $700 per kilogram. Select grade beef was $250 per kilogram. Preferred grade beef was $100 per kilogram. Standard grade beef was $6 per kilogram. Commercial grade beef was $3 per kilogram. And usable grade beef was $1 per kilogram. Mincing and canning didn't count for now. For this cow, the superior grade weighed 40 kilograms. The special grade weighed 76 kilograms. The preferred grade weighed 145 kilograms. The standard grade weighed 184 kilograms. The commercial grade weighed 122 kilograms. And the usable grade weighed 88 kilograms. The rest were calculated separately. Just the meat alone was $28,000 for premium grade, $19,000 for select grade, $14,500 for select grade, $1,100 for standard grade, $366 for commercial grade, and $88 for usable grade. Although it was far from Jiang Hai's beef cow, this cow was estimated to be $63,000. Looking at the report in front of him, Du Feimin smiled. He was quite happy. He was glad that he had made the choice back then. He had trusted Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai had also given him a huge sum of money. He had raised 1 million cows in total. Apart from the 200,000 cows and calves he hadn't killed, The remaining 800,000 were worth $63,000 each. That was 50 for billion dollars. Did anyone know what 50 for billion dollars felt like? Although the remaining $400 million was for Jiang Hai to buy grass, Du Feynman had earned $50 million. But he had also earned 50 billion. This was 50 billion. Most importantly, this money could be earned every year. As he thought about this, Du Feynman's heart started beating faster for no reason. His position in Dubai had always been quite awkward. After all, his father had been qualified to inherit the throne in the past, although the current royal family wasn't like it had been a long time ago. Winners were kings, losers were bandits. When a person became an emperor, the people they had to guard against the most were their own brothers. Therefore, the princes who failed to seize the throne didn't have a good ending. As long as they didn't rebel, the current tribal chiefs couldn't kill them. However, they were still far away from the most important areas. For example, his father didn't care about anything now. Du Feynman was in charge of a part of the tourism industry. However, the tourism industry in Dubai hadn't been doing well in recent years. He wasn't doing very well. There were already some people in the imperial family who were aiming for his position. Although it wasn't to the extent of being in a precarious situation, Du Feynman also knew that there were thieves who were aiming for him. This was definitely not good news. However, he was now relieved. With this project that would generate at least $50 billion a year, he would become one of the most important people in this country. Although he wouldn't immediately enter the core of the country, his position in the upper echelons would be as firm as a rock. He immediately called Jiang Hai to express his excitement. At the same time, he told Jiang Hai that he would buy all the grass in his manor in the future. However, Jiang Hai naturally wouldn't do that. Now that the profits from the grass had appeared, Jiang Hai was also considering whether to raise the price. Therefore, his words were a little vague over the phone. However, after Du Feynman heard Jiang Hai's words, he didn't care, because the profits from the beef were really too much. Therefore, he could bear to give up some more. Besides, Jiang Hai had also said that he would mainly grow emperor bamboo grass and alfalfa in the future. The price of these two kinds of grass was originally higher than that of ordinary grass, so it was understandable that Jiang Hai would sell them more expensive. Even if the price was doubled, it wouldn't be much. Now that Jiang Hai had provided a year's worth of grass for 1 million cows, the price was about $300 million. It was close to $400 million. Even if $400 million was doubled, it would only be $800 million. $800 million could generate a profit of $5 million. No matter how stupid Du Feynman was, he still understood this. After chatting with Jiang Hai for a while, the two agreed to go to Jiang Hai's manor to discuss in detail when they had time. Then, they hung up the phone. Du Feynman, who had hung up the phone, was naturally very happy. Now, he would take this report and go to the royal family to slap their faces. He would let those despicable people who coveted him know that he, Master Du Feynman, was back. On the other side, Jiang Hai was working hard at this time. Looking at the people around him who had already fallen asleep, Jiang Hai also smiled at Prawalton, who was dissatisfied with him stopping. The war continued. While Du Feynman was slapping their faces and Jiang Hai was fighting, a storm swept through the whole world's animal husbandry. As mentioned earlier, Du Feynman's subordinates had sent the samples of the grass to many research institutions around the world. Although some of the grass was recovered in the end, they were all from Europe. The Asian countries such as Japan, Korea, Oceania's Australia, and the United States were not recovered. Therefore, there were many people who knew that Jiang Hai had strong grass. Luke Shan, who was in the United States, had already contacted Jiang Hai before this. He had also signed a contract and obtained the first batch of grass. However, other countries and people were still observing. They also wanted to know the effect of these super grass. National institutions were far from comparable to each other. Therefore, although Du Feynman's people did not disclose this information this time, it was easy to find out that 100,000 cows were killed. However, it was still easy to find out that 100,000 cows had been killed. They didn't know the details on the report, but they could take in the masters who had killed the cows and make an estimate. Almost overnight, Everyone knew that Jiang Hai's super grass was effective, and the effect was quite good. After those cows were eaten, the cows, which were originally worth only a few $1,000s, were now worth about $60,000. Even if it was not $60,000, it was still more than $50,000. How much profit was this? They did not even dare to think about it. Capitalism talked about 50%, 100%, 200%. How much was this now? A few thousand. It would be strange if they did not go crazy. Jiang Hai was practically a gold mine. Almost everyone in the world, who was related to animal husbandry, was trying to find Jiang Hai. All the research institutions, and all the scientists in this field, were trying to solve the mystery of Jiang Hai's grass. For a time, the animal husbandry industry in the whole world was shocked. Of course, there were also some countries who did not know. For example, Huaxia. In Huaxia, no research institution had received the grass from Japan. In China, Jiang Hai did not have any investment projects except for Qi Li's restaurant. Therefore, China was also confused about the shock of animal husbandry abroad, and did not understand what was going on. However, no matter what happened in China, the animal husbandry industry abroad was really like a tsunami. Everyone was looking for Jiang Hai, seeking cooperation, inquiring about information, threatening him, and all kinds of other things. However, after looking for half a night, they found that they could not find Jiang Hai. Almost no one knew about Jiang Hai's phone number. Only a few people knew about it. Apart from the people in his manor, only Qi Li, Pra Walton, and Du Feynman knew about it. However, it was impossible for these three people to give Jiang Hai's phone number to anyone. There was no doubt about that. Therefore, even if the outside world was about to turn upside down, Jiang Hai was still in the hotel room, with his left arm around Pra Walton, and his right arm around Fail Ferrio, sleeping soundly. However, Moses Adams was really miserable. As Jiang Hai's lawyer, his phone was really flooded with calls. Almost everyone who knew about his relationship with Jiang Hai called him. As a lawyer, he could not turn off his phone. How depressing. Chapter 8:10. There was a type of grass that cows could grow 100% marbled beef after eating it, and the quality was extremely high. If someone had said this 3 years ago, they would have probably been scolded to death by animal husbandry people. But now this was a real thing of fact. Because this grass was the grass in Jiang Hai's manor. Ever since Du Feynman's report came out, Jiang Hai's manor became popular almost overnight. Of course, this wasn't the same as being popular among the people. Jiang Hai had become popular in the eyes of some people. These people were some countries and animal husbandry people. Animal husbandry people were easy to persuade. After all, no one was unwilling to let their cattle earn more money. But after all, they were just ordinary people. They had no way to influence Jiang Hai. But countries were different. Some countries, animal husbandry was their main source of income, such as the famous Japan and Korea in Asia. Now, the whole country was thinking about how to get their hands on Jiang Hai's secret. Every time this happened, Jiang Hai would always be glad. He was glad that he came to the United States and not China. Because in the United States, as long as Jiang Haibao could protect himself, the United States government would not do anything to Jiang Hai. This secret was Jiang Hai's, so the country might research it in private, but at least they would not force Jiang Hai to hand over this technology. Jiang Hai was the one who kept this secret. The country might research it in private, but at least they would not force him to hand over this technology. It was like the Iron Man series in the American movies. Compared to other superheroes, Iron Man had replicable abilities. All his abilities were in his armor. So in the movies, the American government could only think of forcing him to hand over the armor. But although Tony Stark was not a politician, and did not have much power, he had a certain amount of fame and money. So the American government did not dare to use force. Although it was just a movie, it also reflected reality. Jiang Hai was like this now. He had a background in Huaxia. He was on good terms with Du Feynman. He was on good terms with the Walton family. He was a big taxpayer in Boston. He was the richest man in Winthrop. These halos were imposed on him, which made those monsters not dare to touch him. especially now that the ruling party was the Democratic Party, and Massachusetts was the stronghold of the Democratic Party. Some of Jiang Hai's taxes had become political donations to these guys. So on the surface, these guys wouldn't let anything happen to Jiang Hai. Therefore, Jiang Hai only needed to be careful not to disappear unknowingly. For this reason, Jiang Hai specially invited Azalina and the others. This could be considered as his foresight. Jiang Hai didn't want to assume what would happen if he was in China. These were unrealistic, but at least it wouldn't be as easy as it was now. After all, some countries had different consciousness systems, and the results were also different. He wasn't afraid of finding trouble with Jiang Hai openly, and he didn't care about his reputation. It was also unlikely that he would find trouble with Jiang Hai privately. In the face of Jiang Hai, who was like a hedgehog, it seemed like he could only visit him alone. Therefore, before those big forces who were crazy about Jiang Hai's pasture could make a move, those small and medium forces had already heard about Jiang Hai's situation and were ready to visit Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai's home address wasn't difficult to find. Since the news came from Du Feimin, early the next morning, someone drove over to visit Jiang Hai's home. After Qi Jie received the news, she directly put up a sign that she wouldn't receive anyone. Because of this, a lot of people were given the cold shoulder. This also made a lot of people's impression of Jiang Hai become worse. But no matter how bad it became, it had nothing to do with Jiang Hai. At least he thought so. After he received the news that day, he had to admit that he was lucky. At least he wasn't at home now. What he was most annoyed about was having to entertain those guys. These guys all came with bad intentions, and Jiang Hai was very clear. Therefore, ignoring them was the best choice. After Prawalton learned about this, he told Jiang Hai that their vacation might be over. But Jiang Hai could stay in his villa for a while. It was still quite safe there. Therefore, Jiang Hai separated from Burke Dollar and Robbins Garcia the next day. He went to Prawalton's villa in Atlantic City, and the two went back to receive the cattle. For 3 days in a row, Jiang Hai's house in Winthrop was crowded with people and carriages, but Jiang Hai hid away. Countless forces came looking for Jiang Hai. Some of them wanted to buy out the secrets in Jiang Hai's hands. In their opinion, there was nothing that couldn't be bought with money. Some of them wanted to cooperate with Jiang Hai. Some of them were even more direct. They wanted to buy the manor. Naturally, there were also some who wanted to take a step back and buy grass from Jiang Hai. However, these people still didn't get anything. It was that simple. Because Jiang Hai wasn't there, they spent a lot of money to find the cowboys here. When they learned that Jiang Hai went out to play and wasn't in the manor, many people were tempted. Therefore, they began to quietly look for Jiang Hai. After they found him, it was unclear what they would do. But even if they racked their brains, they probably wouldn't think that Jiang Hai was hiding in Prawalton's villa. After Prawalton came back, she put more energy into her work, although she only rested for 3 days. But now that Jiang Hai was living in her house, she was full of motivation. After she went back, she first talked to the Walton family and told them not to be swayed, because Jiang Hai's secret couldn't be told to anyone. Secondly, they just had to make money honestly, whether Prawalton's warning was useful or not. At least on the surface, the Walton family calmed down. Indeed, they didn't need to get involved in animal husbandry. They were in the retail business. As long as they got hold of Jiang Hai, they would get more benefits. Secondly, they didn't want to make Jiang Hai unhappy. They could also use Jiang Hai to get in touch with the people who bought his grass. After these people bought the grass, they also needed to sell the cattle. So why couldn't they sell the cattle? Zhao Hai had to admit that the Walton family's people were really smart. After they figured it out, on the 5th day, they announced that Jiang Hai was a guest of the Walton family. This meant that they were on the same starting line as Jiang Hai. This also gave up many people's thoughts. Jiang Hai wasn't an ungrateful person. Since the Walton family helped him, he wouldn't be stingy with his friendship. So he gave them Du Feimin's phone number and took the initiative to build a bridge. The beef that Du Feimin couldn't consume could be sold to the Walton family. Of course, he was mainly a middleman. The specifics of the negotiations had nothing to do with him. And the Walton family, who got benefits from Jiang Hai, naturally knew how to negotiate a business deal. He heard that this business deal was negotiated quickly, but Jiang Hai didn't know how it was negotiated. There were still a lot of people visiting Jiang Hai. Originally, he was only going to stay outside for a week, but now that he looked around, it was almost the end of September. This made him a little worried. After all, he still wanted to go back for the Mid-Autumn Festival. But as far as the current situation was concerned, as long as someone found out that he had returned to his manor, then he wouldn't be able to live a peaceful life. Just as Jiang Hai was considering whether to go back quietly and then stay in the manor until this matter gradually subsided, Valentina sent a message to Jiang Hai's Tinglong company in Boston. "What? You found that person?" Hearing Valentina's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but tremble and sat up a little excitedly, but he accidentally made Colin Barlovich, who was lying in front of him and was constantly swallowing, almost fall down. Feeling her movement, Jiang Hai immediately smiled apologetically and lay down again, and she continued to move. These days, Jiang Hai slept with Prawalton at night, and during the day, the girls of Prawalton naturally wouldn't let Jiang Hai go easily. Just like now, since he got up in the morning, Jiang Hai has not been idle. But fortunately, Jiang Hai's body is really strong, otherwise, he will be exhausted in a few days. Yes, we found Bruce David. This guy is currently living in Los Angeles, but he no longer opens a bar and has become a very bad person. At the same time, we have also found the coordinates on the map you asked us to find. The location is in Redwood National Park, at the junction of California and Oregon. I have sent Lei Lizzie to check it out. If there is specific news, I will inform you immediately. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Valentina also said on the other side. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai's eyes lit up. These two things can be regarded as two good news. One news is related to the badge he is concerned about, and the other news is related to a treasure. Now he can't go home anyway. Instead of this, it's better to go to California. First, he can find out the situation of the badge he wants, and second, he can see if the gold mine is real. As for returning the gold mine to the Toga tribe, he has not considered it. Those gold mines were discovered by him, so they are his, but this still needs to be studied carefully. If a gold mine is really found, how to bring it back, what name to use, and how to get in. These things are very troublesome, but fortunately, Jiang Hai and the others are not ordinary people. If there is any news, let me know immediately. While thinking about it, Jiang Hai hung up the phone, and then couldn't help but take a deep breath. Feeling Jiang Hai's action, Colin Pavlovich in front of him couldn't help but raise his head. "Did my teeth scratch you?" Looking at Jiang Hai, she asked with some worry. Looking at this golden cat, Jiang Hai smiled, touched her hair, and threw her directly on the bed. Chapter 8:11. Hiss. In the middle of the night, Jiang Hai was awakened by the urge to pee. He opened his sleepy eyes. Jiang Hai looked at the big bed and the lovely people lying on it. He couldn't help but rub his head, and then quietly came to the ground. After going to the bathroom to relieve his needs, he walked out of the room in a bathrobe. This was already the 10th day that Jiang Hai had stayed at Pra Walton's place. Since the day when Du Feimin's cows were slaughtered, he hadn't had a moment of peace. There was no way for him to return to the manor, so he decided to hide here for a while. However, based on the current situation, hiding here was actually not a very good choice. Why? Because it was tiring. In the past, some people asked why the country abolished polygamy, like in the ancient times. Some people said that it was because the ratio of men to women was normal now, unlike the Cold Weapon era, where there were frequent wars, and there were more men and women. Some people also said that it was because the social status of women had increased, and women could hold up half the sky. But in fact, in Jiang Hai's view, monogamy might also be a measure to protect men. That kind of thing. Not only men had needs, but also women had needs. Between men and women, there was basically only an exhausted cow, but no land that was plowed and spoiled. In the beginning, Jiang Hai still enjoyed living here for 10 days. These girls were quite open, and Prawalton was also quite indulgent of Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai could play however he wanted. Even if he was watching Japanese romantic action idol dramas, there was no problem for him to follow the routine in those dramas. As long as Jung Hai wanted, he could do whatever he wanted. It could be said that she was very indulgent of Jung Hai. Jung Hai himself was also a dragon. So in the beginning, except for sleeping and eating time, Jung Hai was always in a state of war. But after 3 days, Jung Hai was a little floating. After a week, Jung Hai was a little weak. For example, today was the 10th day he came here. He only came 3 times during the day, and came again at night with Prawalton. But even so, he felt that his feet were a little floating, as if he couldn't exert any strength. Sigh, it's me. If it were an ordinary person, he might have been hospitalized long ago. Rubbing his hair, Jung Hai went downstairs to get a bottle of beer, and sat by the window under the moon. He wanted to be quiet. From here, it could be seen that these girls and the girls in his manor treated him differently in this matter. There were more women in his manor, but they actually still cared about Jung Hai very much, so they only arranged for 4 people to take turns every day. If it were an ordinary person, it might have been over long ago, but with Jung Hai's physical fitness, it was also good. Moreover, it was not that he didn't have time to rest. Every month, he could always rest for about 10 days. But it was different here. Although these girls also valued Jung Hai, they only valued Jung Hai's ability. After all, they relied on Prawalton to live. They loved Prawalton, not him. They didn't need Jung Hai's money. Their relationship with Jung Hai was more like mutual needs, that was all. So they thought more about themselves, and wanted to make themselves comfortable. As for Jung Hai, let's talk about it later. This was also the reason why Jung Hai felt a little homesick after staying here for a few days. Although he played more freely here, this was not his home after all. His home was in Winthrop. Looking at the moon in the sky, as the time gradually approached, Jung Hai also thought about the Mid-Autumn Festival with his family. Should I just give up and go back? Thinking of this, Jung Hai couldn't help but rub his head. That was why people were afraid of being famous, and pigs were afraid of being fat. Especially for people like Jung Hai. He really didn't care whether he was famous or not. He didn't know when this storm would blow over, and he didn't feel comfortable staying outside. Can't sleep? I thought you must have gone to bed very early these days, because you were so tired. Just as Jung Hai was thinking about it, a voice suddenly sounded in Jung Hai's ear. Hearing this voice, Jung Hai looked back and found that it was none other than one of Prawalton's little girlfriends, Cheryl Lee, the Korean girl. The moonlight sprinkled on her body, perfectly presenting her body in front of Jung Hai. Maybe it was because of Prawalton's order, or their previous habits. If Jung Hai's place was only a little cool, then this place was completely cold. Because in this villa, these women didn't wear anything. His upper body, lower body, and even shoes were not worn. He was naked from head to toe, with nothing on him. The moonlight shone on her skin. It was just her real skin that attracted Jung Hai's gaze. Although he had seen this many times, to be honest, every time he saw it, he felt that it wasn't enough. He had to admit that these girls were impeccable, whether it was in terms of appearance or figure. Not to mention Cheryl Lee. The other girls had the thick pores and freckles that were unique to Europeans, as well as the smell that came from eating beef and mutton all year round. However, these girls did not have any of these. They were all very tall and had very thin pores. They were almost the same as Asian women. However, they still had the three-dimensional 5 views of Europeans. Their figures were very slender and full. They weren't as thin as some girls. They were thin where they should be thin, and fat where they should be fat. They usually had nothing to do. The only thing they had to do was to maintain their figures with the help of professionals. Therefore, they were the most delicate existences. As for the problem of body odor, when your staple food was more than $200 per kilogram of beef, you would also find that the problem of body odor when eating beef didn't apply to your body. When she saw Jung Hai looking over, she couldn't help but smile. Then, she took the initiative to sit opposite Jung Hai. She took the beer from Jung Hai's hand and took a sip. Then, she stuffed the beer back into Jung Hai's hand. Ugh, this beer is really bitter. I'm not used to drinking it without lemon. Cheryl Lee curled her lips and said to Jiang Hai. A large part of domestic beer was blended. There were very few brews. For the sake of taste, the alcohol content of these beers wasn't particularly high. Beer had 2 degrees. One was the degree of malt, and the other was the degree of alcohol. Usually, when others drank, they mainly drank malt, which was about 10 degrees. In addition, there was also the degree of alcohol. This was actually the most important factor. This affected the taste. The degree of alcohol in the brewed beer was high. With a high degree of alcohol, after drinking it, it would feel very bitter. But if it was iced and drunk with lemon juice, it would feel sweet. If someone didn't believe it, they could buy some Corona and drink it with lemon. Then they would feel it. However, Jiang Hai was used to drinking here, so it felt good even without lemon. You are still more used to drinking soju. I saw on TV that people in South Korea drink like this. Listening to Cheryl Lee's words, Jiang Hai smiled. It seemed that when he watched those Korean dramas, the people in them all drank like this. Yeah, do you like to drink it too? Hearing Jiang Hai mention soju, Cheryl Lee couldn't help but ask happily. Me? I don't like it. Looking at her excited appearance, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile and say. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Cheryl Lee couldn't help but kick Jiang Hai. This guy really likes to sing a different tune. Being kicked by her, Jiang Hai didn't care. Instead, he smiled and continued to drink. What he said was the truth. He really didn't like South Korea's stuff. South Korea's soju was actually similar to green wine. They were both brewed with rice. The degree of alcohol wasn't high, around 18 to 22 degrees. But because there were no spices, the taste was hee-hee. According to the words of the Northeasterners, drinking soju was very noisy. It wasn't strong, and the stimulation was very small. It was as strong as beer, but it wasn't that strong. Instead, it had an indescribable fragrance. So basically, when Hwaseong people drank soju, if they liked it for the first time, then they liked it. If they didn't like it, then they wouldn't drink it in the future. Jiang Hai belonged to the kind of people who didn't like it. However, Jiang Hai still liked a lot of Korean food. For example, he liked to eat cold noodles. This was Korean food. He liked to eat cakes, barbecue, and especially barbecue sauce. Without barbecue sauce, barbecue is incomplete. But he really didn't like soju. Seeing that Jiang Hai didn't say anything, Cheryl Lee hesitated. Have you been busy recently? Looking at Jiang Hai, Cheryl Lee asked him. When she asked, she didn't dare to look at Jiang Hai. It could be seen that she was somewhat guilty and hesitant at this time. Don't you know whether I'm busy or not? You stay by my side all day long. Although I'm not busy now, I shouldn't be able to leave here. What's the matter? Looking at her hesitant appearance, Jiang Hai froze for a moment. Then, he thought of something in his mind, but on the surface he still sat there calmly. He wanted to hear whether Cheryl Lee was looking for him for that matter. That there's someone who wants to see you. I don't know if it's convenient for you. Clenching her teeth, Cheryl Lee spoke. She was just a messenger. If she wasn't there, that person would still be able to find Jiang Hai. It's just that it wouldn't be that convenient. Someone from Korea? Hearing her words, Jiang Hai looked at her and asked with a smile. She also nodded heavily. It seems that I'm right. Touching his chin, Jiang Hai narrowed his eyes and said. Chapter 8:12. Prawalton's identity was not a secret in the world. Prawalton was one of the princesses of the Walmart family. Although her family background was not very good, she had become the focus of attention from all sides ever since she showed her strength. Naturally, the background of the girls around her was also investigated thoroughly. No matter which country it was, they were very happy to arrange their people around her. Cheryl Lee and the others were such people. They were not arranged by the country after they had been trained. After the country knew about their existence, they were roped in again. Of course, they were not spies. To be exact, they were just some mouthpieces. Prawalton and the Walmart Group also needed some mouthpieces like this. They needed to pass on some information that they needed to let these countries know. They could also let these countries report back to them. But these women would be like this for the rest of their lives. It was impossible for them to be given any power or the like. This was also why Prawalton had 5 women around her. But only Isabel Lauren was in charge of some things. The others were only in charge of making beautiful flowers. They did not care about anything else. The reason why Isabel Lauren was in charge was because she was an orphan. The power of Jiang Hai's forage this time could be said to have caused a shock in the global animal husbandry industry. Everyone was looking at Jiang Hai. Everyone hoped to get a piece of the cake. They all saw Jiang Hai's performance. It was definitely impossible to do it openly. Needless to say, the halos on Jiang Hai's body didn't need to be said, and it was also impossible to do it secretly. Jiang Hai's influence in the local area was deeper than they thought. Since it was impossible to do it openly or secretly, it was better to do it privately. Just like Du Feynman, this was also very good. Of course, if they came to buy forage, some countries would not be interested in Jiang Hai's forage at all. After all, how big was Jiang Hai's manor? How much forage could he collect? Barbara Martina from Argentina and Fail Ferrio from Australia were also in Prawalton. These two had not been in contact with Jiang Hai alone recently. This meant that there was no one behind them. These people did not care about Jiang Hai's forage. What they wanted was technology. Since the technology could not be obtained, the forage was useless. If they wanted it, they would not distribute it evenly. Instead, it was Cheryl Lee who found Jiang Hai and expressed that South Korea wanted to buy forage from Jiang Hai. Hearing Cheryl Lee's words, Jiang Hai smiled. He did not care about this. If it was to buy forage, then he would sell it. The newly developed grass market was for the purpose of selling grass. But if it was for other purposes, haha. I will discuss it with Pra tomorrow and tell you. Hearing Cheryl Lee's words, Jiang Hai also smiled and said. Hearing that Jiang Hai wanted to discuss it, Cheryl Lee did not care. After finishing her business, she turned around and went back to sleep. Looking at her graceful figure, although Jiang Hai was a little angry in his heart, his body was weak. In the end, he gave up with a wry smile. After drinking, he returned to his room and fell asleep with Cheryl Lee in his arms. After getting up early the next morning, Jiang Hai stopped Prawalton, who was going to work, and explained to her that Cheryl Lee looked for him last night. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton also told Jiang Hai that he could contact this South Korea. Jiang Hai must sell his forage, but he could not only sell it to Du Feynman and Luke Shan. It was also a good choice to increase the number of people who wanted to buy forage. However, Jiang Hai had to pay attention to some things. The business world was like a battlefield. The effect between countries was originally unequal. These guys were ungrateful. If Jiang Hai wanted to come into contact with them, then it would be better for him to make some preparations. After hearing Prawalton's words, Jiang Hai thought for a moment, and then called Chi Li and Moses Adams. The three of them discussed it on the phone. They felt that Jiang Hai should be able to study it and solve some of the people who wanted to buy it. At least nominally, they had to solve the problem of the people who wanted to buy it. This way, Jiang Hai could save a lot of effort. So he thought for a moment, and thought that he could refer to those who were selling things. He could gather those who wanted to buy his forage, and then directly distribute the shares to them. That would be enough. And the most important thing was that these people gathered together. It was easier for him to raise the price. At the same time, he could also save himself a lot of trouble. To be honest, Jiang Hai was very disgusted with those politicians and professional businessmen. Chatting with them was simply a matter of life and death. Although Jiang Hai was very smart, he didn't like to use his brain. So he hated talking nonsense with those people. It was best to solve these guys at once. This way, Jiang Hai could save himself a lot of trouble. Since the decision was made, Jiang Hai also talked to Prawalton. Prawalton also felt that although this couldn't maximize the benefits, Jiang Hai would undoubtedly save a lot of trouble. And it was quite good to do so. After she agreed, Jiang Hai called Moses Adams. He would leave this matter to him. As for the time, he set it to be the day before the Mid-Autumn Festival. This way, after he was done, he could go back to the manor to spend the mid-autumn. Jiang Hai was the kind of person who would do what he thought. He called Moses Adams. Moses Adams was also very interested in this opportunity to make friends with the major forces. Then he booked the top floor of the Boston Harbor Hotel, including a banquet hall. Jiang Hai spent more than $3 million just to book these things. But Jiang Hai didn't care, because this time, the wealth he would create would be more than $3 million. This time, he was going to make 300 million? No, 3 billion. 1,000th of the cost, for Jiang Hai, was actually nothing. After making the decision and confirming the hotel, Moses Adams made a phone call. The first person he called was Du Feynman. When Du Feynman learned that Jiang Hai was forced to directly distribute the pasture, he hated his guards and the islanders even more. If it weren't for these guys, Jiang Hai's pasture would be his alone. By then, with Jiang Hai's expansion of the pasture, let alone $50 billion, he would be able to make $100 billion. And you should know that the Dubai Emirate wasn't very big. In 2012, the national GDP of Dubai was $86.7 billion, but this year, he alone made $50 billion. GDP meant gross national product. He alone increased Dubai's economy by 30%. If it weren't for those damn guards and the islanders, they could have increased even more. In Dubai, these people were the gods. There was no need to talk about whether they paid taxes or not. Apart from buying pasture and paying the workers, the rest of the money was earned by them. But now these things were far away from him. But he knew that this matter couldn't be blamed on Jiang Hai. It was his own problem, so he could only swallow his anger. But he was still the first to agree to Jiang Hai's invitation. Then Moses Adams called Luke Sean. After a long chat, Luke Sean agreed. He knew that now was not the time to make a private deal. It was inevitable that he would come to Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai also informed Cheryl Lee and asked her to ask for South Korea's opinion. The person in charge of South Korea wanted to talk to Jiang Hai alone at first, but after knowing that Jiang Hai intended to put things on the table, they didn't say much. It was because they weren't very good at the moment. They were determined to get Jiang Hai's pasture. In addition, there were many people who received the invitation, but some of them were prepared to come. Some of them originally had impure intentions, but after learning that Jiang Hai didn't intend to tell others his secret, and was only preparing to sell grass, they gave up. For example, some people from the United States, Australia and Europe. But according to Moses Adams' statistics, when Jiang Hai decided to open this branch, there were still about a dozen people who decided to come and see what the situation was. Of course, the dozen mentioned here didn't include small manor owners, farm owners, and so on. These people basically represented a region, a country, or a force. For example, Du Feynman, Luke Sean, and South Korea. On the United States side, there were 6 people who came to participate, but only 3 of them were well known. They were Luke Sean, who represented Texas, Archie Alderson Emerson, who represented California, and John Malone, the largest landowner in the United States, who owned 2 million acres of land. Of course, the old man himself didn't come. It was his son who came, and he only represented Montana. Even so, the power contained within this person was not something those individual investors could compare to. On Moses Adams' list, these 3 people were considered first-class clients. Du Feynman and the government of South Korea were also classified as first-class clients, but they were not first-class clients because they represented the same country. To be honest, after making money at Jiang Hai's level, one would realize that the people who represented a country were actually the poorest. This was because although a country earned a lot, it also spent a lot, especially in the developed countries. South Korea wasn't very developed. Don't forget, South Korea's main GDP came from the Samsung Group. But do you think Samsung would pay taxes to the authorities? Don't be ridiculous. So among these people, South Korea should be the most embarrassed. Chapter 8:13. Since it had been decided, Jiang Hai and the others had to start making arrangements. Prawalton and Moses Adams were familiar with this. After making a call and setting a time, all they had to do was wait for that day. The night before, Jiang Hai left Prawalton's house in Atlantic City and stayed in the presidential suite of this hotel. Galena and Ale Sarah were responsible for protecting Jiang Hai. At the very least, they were in contact with Jiang Hai's body. Of course, for Jiang Hai and the others, this was not a big deal. They were already used to it. After a night's stay, the next day was the day of the conference, and the bigwigs came to the hotel one after another. The first to come was naturally Du Feynman. After Moses Adams received him, he naturally had some time alone with Jiang Hai. Although he was a little annoyed that the matter had been leaked from him, with the $50 billion he had earned, it was enough for him to establish a foothold in the royal family. It was enough for him to gain a foothold in the royal family. A few days ago he took those reports to the palace. It was almost a slap in the face to let those who refused to accept him know why the flowers were red. Now that he saw Jiang Hai again, he naturally felt a little guilty, a little helpless and a little worried. He really wanted to monopolize all of Jiang Hai's pasture. But he knew it was impossible. So the two of them left after exchanging a few pleasantries. Then, Luke Shan came in person with his son. After expressing his intentions to Jiang Hai, he went to rest. Then one by one people arrived. They either represented individuals or forces. Moses Adams was quite excited. At the very least, he did not have many opportunities to show his face in front of these top figures. Soon it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Jiang Hai went to the reception room first. After he arrived, the 17 people who represented individuals or forces also arrived. Jiang Hai looked at them and felt that there was a clear division between them. At this time, the 17 forces in front of him were clearly divided into 3 groups. The first group represented individuals, such as Luke Shan and the son of John Malone, an American real estate tycoon. They sat alone on the left. Those sitting in the middle were people who represented forces, such as people from Montana and New Mexico. Luke Shan from Texas came, but no one else came. In addition, there were some foreign ranchers. For example, people from Australia and Argentina. Although these two countries did not take Jiang Hai seriously, the ranchers in their countries took Jiang Hai very seriously. In addition to these people, the last group represented their countries. In fact, there were only 2 groups of people. One was Du Feynman, and the other was the people from South Korea. Jiang Hai deliberately looked at the person from South Korea and found that he was really arrogant. He raised his neck arrogantly, as if he disdained Jiang Hai and the others. Seeing this, Jiang Hai could not help but laugh. What a sad nation. South Korea, whether in terms of historical status or military status, was actually a very awkward country. As for the existence of South Korea, I think most of the Chinese know about it. Their existence is similar to that of Japan. It was a product of the division of power between the United States and Huaxia after World War II. The result of its existence was a war. In that war, it was naturally said that the country had won. But in fact, it was hard to say who won and who lost. After all, North Korea was not unified, and South Korea did not take over the North. Maintaining the current situation was acceptable for both the Huaxia and the United States. However, the people from South Korea were very interesting. This country was different from Japan. Japan had indeed shown in the economic aspect. In the 1980s, it was the world of the Japanese. Even the United States had to temporarily avoid them. However, later on, the United States cheated Japan, causing Japan's economy to regress by 20 years. Even so, before the rise of the Huaxia, Japan was the world's second largest economy. As the saying goes, a starving camel is still bigger than a horse. In terms of economic development, Japan was indeed very powerful. It was only a small place, but it had the ability to stir up the world's economy. Japan also had a lot of consortiums, and many of them were internationally famous. On the other hand, although South Korea was also known as a developed country, South Korea only had the Samsung-Lee family. All of the consortiums had ties with the Samsung-Lee family. With just the Samsung-Lee family alone, it was still far from enough for them to establish themselves in the big world. They did not have too many high-end industries to send to the world. It was an awkward situation. If a country wanted to develop, it must at least be able to sell things. Other countries wanted to buy things. For example, China was still a developing country. Most of the things they sold were raw materials, such as rare earths. This was also criticized by others. But at least these were things that could be sold. People wanted to buy them. What did South Korea have? Cars? Mobile phones? That's all there is to it. In the world, cars were divided into 3 gears. The first gear was for European and American cars, the second gear was for Japanese cars, and the third gear was for Korean cars. This could be seen from the fact that Korea's cars didn't sell well in other countries except Asia. As for the famous mobile phones and computers in China, they were also completely defeated by brands like Apple. It could be said that they were a little embarrassed. As for South Korea, in order to develop their country, they specially created an idol economy. They used their Korean dramas and girl groups to increase their international popularity and let people come over to travel and sell their expenses. They used these people as spokespersons to sell their own country's products. Anyone who was sensible knew that this was the end of the world. For example, the place where they exported most of their culture, Hwaseong mainland. As long as Hwaseong was banned, the economy here would collapse. It was that simple. These people were naturally unconvinced. They mocked and provoked Hwaseong every day. As for their American adoptive father, they had been showing off. They did not allow the troops to be stationed there, banned beef, etc., and went on demonstrations on the streets. The Americans listened to them and withdrew their troops. As a result, North Korea started to make a statement. Once they made a statement, they were like frightened children. They went everywhere to seek help. They even went to Soviet Russia. He had to admit that this country was quite pitiful. The people of this country were also quite interesting. They were arrogant and did not have the attitude of North Korea that was unafraid of death. According to the language of the Northeast, these people really deserved a beating. This time, they came to look for Jeonghai to buy grass. Their main purpose is their country's Han cattle. Because of its geographical location, it is only a small place. The agricultural development is also not ideal. Initially, they wanted to learn from Japan and go for the high-end route. They had been promoting their country's Han cattle. But to be honest, Han cattle are not ranked in the world. They are not even as delicious as Angus cattle. This was also an unchanging fact. When Angus beef from the United States entered the Korean market, many people in Korea shouted that they did not want American beef to enter the market. Even if American beef tasted better than their own Korean beef, was 4 times cheaper, and could not be bought with fake products, they still did not want American beef to enter the market. However, the American beef still entered the market, but the authorities of South Korea had always been determined to promote their own country's beef. After learning that Jeonghai had that kind of magical pasture, they cultivated their own country's Korean cattle. Then, they can announce to the world that this is their country's beef. Although it is shameless, Jeonghai does not mind. Because all he cared about was money, that's all. They were willing to go to the front to take the bullet. Jeonghai was very happy. After everyone sat down, Moses Adams gave each person a piece of information. This information was about the nutritional content of the grass, as well as the yield of the grass. Of course, the information mentioned above was 2 years later. Jeonghai currently owned a total of 24,500 acres of pastoral area. With the cultivation of emperor bamboo grass, 1 acre of it could reach a yield of 30 tons. However, Jeonghai was not prepared to take care of it, but with the transformation of spiritual energy, 1 acre of it could reach a yield of 25 tons. 1 mu is equal to 6 mu. This means that Jeonghai can produce 367,500 tons of imperial bamboo grass and alfalfa in 1 year. Because Jeonghai's grass is rich in nutrition, each cow only needs to eat about 10% of its body weight every day. As for the other grass, it needs to eat at least 14%. According to the calculation of 1 ton per cow, it needs to eat about 10 kilograms of grass per day. Excluding the fattening period, it is 3,650 kilograms per year, 365 tons. In other words, Jeonghai's grass can supply the grass consumed by 1 million cows. Among them, Jeonghai keeps 300,000 tons of grass because he is also raising cows. Of course, his cows and goats had to be eaten until they were full. The remaining 3 million tons of fodder was the amount that was allocated this time. To be honest, 3 3 million tons of fodder could be digested by any one of them. 900,000 cows was quite a spectacular sight for ordinary people. It was an astronomical figure, but for these people, it was not much different. In the past, Luke Shawn and Du Feynman used these grasses as nourishment. They mixed it with other grass and fed it to the cows in the manner. But they all know that if they only feed the cows with this grass, although it may not reach the level of Jiang Hai's cows, which could be sold for $160,000, it would at least be a lot better than now. Now a cow was sold for $60,000. When the time comes, it may be sold for $80,000 or even $100,000. Just thinking about it made them a little excited. Chapter 8:14. Everyone present knew that Jiang Hai's grass had such an effect. Everyone wanted to take the grass for themselves. However, they knew that this was unlikely, and they had no way to find Jiang Hai's grass anywhere else. In a sense, Jiang Hai's grass was like a scorpion's poop. It was unique. Therefore, when they saw Jiang Hai's stack of information, they were a little envious. However, they also knew that it was impossible to defeat so many opponents and take these herbs for their own use. I'm not a businessman, and I don't like to bargain or play with traps. Now we're dividing the 3 million tons of pasture that can be produced in the year after next. I can guarantee that the effect of the pasture won't be worse than the current pasture. As for how to divide the 3 million tons, it depends on your sincerity. After seeing that everyone in front of him had finished reading the information, Jiang Hai also said straightforwardly. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, one of them couldn't sit still. If you say that these grasses have such an effect, do they really have such an effect? Seeing is believing, and hearing is false. Aren't you a little too anxious to sell the grass that's going to grow in 2 years? The man looked at Jiang Hai, put down the information in his hand, and said very plainly. After hearing his words, many people around him nodded. These people also had the same idea. While Jiang Hai listened to Moses Adams's words, he did not know who this person was. After learning the man's identity, Jiang Hai nodded. He was Paul Casby, an Australian livestock tycoon. He had about 700,000 acres of land under his control, raised about 1.2 million cows, and had more than 30 million sheep. Although cows were important to Australians, the economic value of sheep was actually higher. The whole of Australia was desertified, although they put the name of a disaster on the rabbits. But actually the development of animal husbandry was also greatly related. The food that a cow ate was more than what 10 sheep ate. Therefore, there were indeed more sheep in Australia than cows. However, the sheep they raised were not for drinking milk and eating mutton. They mainly ate beef and raised sheep for the purpose of shaving their wool. Australia's wool was quite famous around the world. Hello, Mr. Casby. I'm here to answer your questions. Believe me if you want. If you don't, you can leave. Although this man had some status, it didn't mean that Jiang Hai would spoil him. Jiang Hai gently tapped the table with his fingernail, as he said to the man in a flat tone. You. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the man's face suddenly turned red. What did Jiang Hai mean? Was the shop bullying its customers? Indeed, Jiang Hai was bullying his customers. The grass was his. If these people wanted to buy it, they could buy it. If they didn't want to buy it, they could leave because he didn't have to worry about selling it. It was such a simple problem. $600, I'll take it all. Looking at Jiang Hai, Du Feynman smiled, his eyes shining. At the same time, he despised these people in his heart. They were really short-sighted. 330 tons of grass could provide food for 1 million cows for a year. Even if these cows were sold for only $60,000 each, it would be 60 billion in total. Don't forget that the cows he raised were also raised with a mix of grass and ordinary fodder. In other words, these 330 tons could feed 2 million cows, which was 120 billion. Even if an ordinary country had to pay taxes, after paying half, there would still be 60 billion left. $2 billion for grass, it was nothing. For Du Feynman, he would take as much grass as Jiang Hai had. This was inevitable. No, I wrote in the agreement that each person can only buy 30% at most. Shaking his head, Jiang Hai spoke very calmly. He couldn't tie his economic lifeline to someone else. Look, no one wants it. You have nothing to do with the rest anyway, so sell it to me. If not, I'll raise the price to $700 per ton. How about that? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin also spoke with a smile, his eyes shining. Who said no one wants it? We want it too. But before Du Feimin could say more to persuade Jiang Hai, Luke Shan spoke directly. As he spoke, he nodded at Jiang Hai. Then let's split it equally. Du Feimin knew that Luke Shan had been in contact with Jiang Hai before this. So when Luke Shan also said he wanted it, he couldn't help but twitch his mouth. In fact, in his opinion, the grass should all be his. If it weren't for the people who leaked the information, he would have killed them long ago. Now he wanted to catch them and kill them again. This was all money. Your Highness Du Feimin Vihar Muhammad bin Rashid Al Maktoum. You don't think that we're sitting here just for fun, do you? We're definitely going to take this grass. At this moment, John Malone spoke with a smile. As soon as he spoke, everyone present looked at each other. They could faintly see a trace of anxiety in their eyes. Jiang Hai said that each person could buy up to 30% of the grass. Now there were already 3 people who wanted to buy it, which meant that only 10% of the grass was left. Although these people felt that the grass was expensive, they couldn't accept it if they weren't allowed to buy it. On behalf of South Korea and the Republic of China, I would also like to discuss the issue of the grass with Mr. Jiang. At this time, the arrogant representative of South Korea, who had been sitting at the side, couldn't help but speak seriously. As soon as he spoke, the other people's expressions became a little ugly. This was exactly what Jiang Hai needed. How about this? There are only 3 million tons of grass in total. If anyone wants to buy it, write a note to me, and then I'll distribute it. Of course, you can also think that I'm not distributing it evenly, then please leave. Looking at the somewhat tense atmosphere in front of him, Jiang Hai smiled, then looked at the people in front of him and spoke seriously. After hearing what Jiang Hai said, although these people were angry, none of them dared to express it. Instead, some people who had a tacit understanding with Jiang Hai, and some people who knew how to be flexible, had already begun to write. Not long after, 17 notes were collected by Moses Adams. Jiang Hai also took a look at what was written on these notes, and he couldn't help but smile. The reason these people came here was actually more of a test and an attempt. However, none of them lacked the tens of millions or hundreds of millions to buy the grass. Therefore, the amount they gave was very large, but Jiang Hai could control the amount they bought. This was called a rare commodity worth hoarding. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.